Down, Toby. Thanks very much for joining me. How have you been, mate?
Sure, good. Thanks. Very glad to do it.
Thanks for coming on. God, okay, so d definitely my most requested guest. Anyone who reads at all about the subject of Northern Ireland or the Troubles, the book Bandit Country will come up. I hadn't read it this whole time, and I kept kind of saying, okay, I'd love to interview the author, and I'll read it then. And I know it's like a thick book. I'll kind of give it the attention it deserves. Absolutely fantastic. I'm not just saying it. Absolute classic when it comes to the literature around the subject.
Well, thanks very much. Yeah, very kind of you. Yeah, I can't believe it makes me feel old, but I can't believe it was 25 years ago. But it's really good to have it back out in the bookshops because for some reason it went out of print with when it was originally published by Hodder, it went out of print, quite a number of years ago. And then Bite Back just republished it just in the last few months. So it's really great to have it back out in the marketplace, as they say.
You mentioned in the I think it was like the preface of the new one that you went and returned to this place, this place that you said you wouldn't. I found that quite interesting.
Right. Yeah, that's right. So I'm trying to think when it would have been. I think it was about 2016 I went back. So the book was published in I think November 1999, so exactly 25 years ago. And I had been the island correspondent for the Telegraph based in Belfast from 96 to 99. And that's when I researched the book. I spent an absolute ton of time in South Armagh. Um, and my feeling was, I'm just gonna put it all on the table. I'm gonna write the book without sort of fear or favor. I'm gonna not gonna pull any punches. Obviously, there's a lot of legal stuff I had to navigate, and there's a lot of stuff that's difficult to kind of find out. And there's some sensitivities with victims and stuff. And then sometimes people tell you things, and it's kind of off the record. You can't quote them, or you can't identify them. So there's a lot of stuff to navigate. But beyond that, I felt I'm just going to give it everything I can. And I knew towards the end of the writing, I knew that I was going to be sent by the Telegraph overseas, and I got a posting in Washington D.C. I thought, right, I'm just going to write the thing, you know, and then I'm going to leave, and I'm never going to go back because I mean, like, you never know how something's going to be received. And obviously, I named a lot of names, which I sort of wanted to do because I wanted to put as much out in the public domain as I could. And I've written about the South Armagh Brigade. Um, I think in a pretty neutral, straightforward fashion. This is what they did. These were their capabilities. These were the type of people they were, and it was by no means like a hatchet job or a takedown. And in fact, some people on the British side got kind of upset with, not calling them terrorists and thugs, and there's a lot of kind of British Army people who give them their due, sort of militarily. Um, but on the other hand, I know what people are capable of, and so I thought it was sort of an advantage being an outsider, really, because if you're a journalist from Ireland, you have to live in that society. You have all your relatives and your sort of baggage from growing up and all the rest of it, and being a journalist or writer or whatever is a practical business, and and so I think if I'd have continued, say I thought, well, okay, so I've got the next 20 years to live and work here, it would have been a different type of book, I think, because I probably would have had to have pulled a few punches. So, so I said I'd never go back, and I kept to that for, I guess, nearly 20 years. And then around about 2016, I was over um, in Belfast. Actually, I got an invitation to speak to a British Army unit at Palace Barracks. That's why I was back. And so somebody on the British side said, uh, you want, do you want to go down to South Armagh and we'll, take a drive around Cross McGlen and everything. And so I thought, screw it, I'll go. And it was the same place in many ways. So there was, for instance, one thing I really noticed was there was the strike mark from a 50 caliber round on the side of Murta's bar, which was from a sniper attack in 1994. In fact, the last one before the first IRA ceasefire. And I remember it was a Grenadier guardsman called Danny Blinko, who's 6'6" tall, like impressive kind of guardsman. And I looked at the inquest file and saw the autopsy photos, and the round had gone straight through like one side of his chest, out the other, and relative, 50 caliber round, half-inch rounds. So, um, a relatively small entry wound and like a massive, like bigger than a baseball, like a massive exit wound, which just, I think he spoke a couple of words and then he was dead. And it was just, remarkable and kind of spooky, really, to see the strike marks still on the side of the pub because, presumably in the course of 25 years, there'd been lots of redecoration and painting and what have you going on, and that had never been filled in. So that's not accidental. And so, um, that just said to me that it's kind of a point of pride. I don't know through for the whole um, town or anything like that, but certainly for Republicans down there, that's a point of pride. That's what they did, and they're not going to have that erased. But at the same time, the all the watchtowers are down. The Golf and Romeo watchtowers, which were dotted around the landscape, sort of surveillance platforms and kind of static bases for the British Army. They'd all gone. The Baruki Sanger, which was the sort of famous uh, kind of modification of the IEC base. It was a joint IEC British Army base in Crossmaglen on the square. Um, that had gone, and I think it was kind of unmanned. I think somebody told me it was basically unmanned. That there was like one police officer there or something. So obviously there were no British Army patrols, and the police service in Northern Ireland now operating on the ground and driving around. So the military presence was much, much less sort of in your face, but it still looked basically the same. And you know, I know that the same sort of people are still around and still kind of big figures in the community. I didn't see it. I mean, I didn't see anybody that I knew. One of the strange things was when I used to go down in the late 90s and I spent a lot of time down there. I felt that whenever I went down there, I'd always see this guy who's named in the book as the surgeon, who was the South Armagh brigade commander. I'd always see him like driving in his 4x4, coming the opposite direction, or sitting on a wall or somewhere. So I didn't see him. But yeah, it was yeah. I'm glad I went back.
In terms of reception, I read two. Okay, so firstly, apparently, Bandit Country is like required reading for the British Army. What a huge compliment for an author to produce a book that does that. And there was also, this made me laugh, but apparently apparently some prominent Republicans wanted to read the book and wanted to see what was in it, but didn't want to put money in your pocket, so they actually arranged for to have a bunch of them stolen. I found
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think I've had over the years I've had contacts with a number of Republicans, some of whom I knew already, um, and others I didn't. And I think there's a recognition that uh, the IRA was given its due. I mean, the South Armagh Brigade is it's a very kind of pure element of the struggle in a way because it's South Armagh is almost entirely Catholic. So the the stuff in Fermanagh and Belfast and Derry, which has a sort of sectarian edge to it, because obviously you might have your farmer on a remote farm is a UDR man, but he's also your Protestant neighbor, and so that kind of stuff just wasn't a feature of South Armagh, or I mean, the further north you go, and Newton, Hamilton, Keady, there are some Protestants, but but really it was a sort of a full-on military struggle between the British Army and the British security forces and the IRA, and so that's what the I think that's what Bandit Country captures. And although individual IRA men, and I've heard of a couple of comments from some, one or two of them, about how they feel about me or how they feel about sort of being exposed. Um, I've heard from others who are just like, well, um, that told it how it was, and it sort of redressed the imbalance between all the Sinn Féin stuff and Adams and McGuinness and Belfast and Derry and sort of the politics of it and the focus on those two cities. Um, and it told the story of the rural struggle, which was also kind of the engine room for the IRA. So um, you know, basically ran the England department in the 1990s and produced these huge bombs in Canary Wharf and Manchester and Bishopsgate and which were had a major effect on the big picture. So so in a weird way, I think I probably could have continued living in Belfast and continued working, and I would have been totally fine because um, because I think the book was I played it pretty straight.
New edition, there was since deaths of people that you couldn't name in the old one. I believe the Undertaker you were able to name as Patrick O'Callaghan. You were
Yeah,
also able to name the Garda that I think it was a Smith inquiry found to be
yeah.
responsible for
Oh,
passing
and Corrigan, yeah.
about Breen and Buchanan said, yeah, Owen Corrigan, yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's just one of the things. I mean, um, obviously, like UK libel laws, pretty stringent, and Republicans, have no problem using, the British courts to get what they want, and so um, the uh, the legal side of publishing Bandit Country was pretty fraught in 1999, and I wanted to tell uh, everything I could, but obviously you can't libel people, and if people haven't been convicted of things, then even if they're portrayed positively, and even if they're extremely proud of what they've done, then they could take a libel action against you. But um, when people die, I mean, obviously the dead can't sue, and so I just wanted to identify um, the people who I hadn't been who I hadn't been able to identify. Not like wholesale, but so Patsy O'Callaghan, I felt it's not like a negative thing. I mean, he was a proud IRA volunteer and revered and highly effective military commander, and actually he's mentioned in the book the Yank by John Crawley recently. Talked in very complimentary terms about Patsy O'Callaghan. But I mean, these names, like so, the Surgeon and the Undertaker are kind of slightly, I mean, looking back, slightly comical kind of names, pseudonyms, and I just gave them. I remember sitting down on my sofa, sort of with my girlfriend in Belfast, thinking like, damn, the publisher said I can't use these names. You know, let's come up with something else, and coming up with these names. And it's funny because with the Surgeon, I now read, that was his nickname by the British Army, or that was his nickname from the IRA, or whatever. No, no, I just I just dreamt that up. And Patsy O'Callaghan, the Undertaker, I don't know. Looking back, I probably could have come up with something better than that. But but anyway, yeah, that was Patsy O'Callaghan. I just thought, I didn't rewrite the book. I didn't go into it and start updating it and stuff because I thought, well, that would have been really, really difficult. And I think it stood the test of time. But I just wanted to, you know, um, do a little bit of an update because, quite a lot of things happen in 25 years. And some of the main players dying was part of that. I mean, another one was PJ Caraher, who's the father of Mihal Karaha, who was convicted of being one of the 50 caliber snipers. So, I mean, I don't think it would have surprised anybody that PJ Karaha was an IRA man. And I interviewed his brother Owen Karaha, who who'd fought in the border campaign, and actually Fergal Karaha, who was Mihal's brother, who was shot dead by Royal Marines in 1990. He was named a Sinn Féin at the time, but he was an IRA volunteer, and since then has been recognised as an IRA volunteer. But at the time, for basically propaganda reasons, the Republican movement, I think to the dismay of the family in some ways, didn't want to identify Fergal as an IRA volunteer. But with the passage of time, some of these things can be written about more openly, and so that's kind of the way history works.
Funny enough, actually, you mentioned Fergal Gallagher being killed. His brother Mihal. I don't know if it had anything to do with it, but 3 years later, on the exact date, he actually got a sniper kill himself. Yeah. Okay. So I was going to say, okay, we'll get into the actual brigade themselves because that's the main kind of meat of what we're going to be discussing. I'm sure people who have listened to this show before would probably know about them, and I've interviewed soldiers who have fought against them.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, fellas who's operated their spy handlers and so on. Just that there's a few kind of stats and stuff that illustrate how kind of unique they were and how like uniquely effective. So, for example, 1/5 of all British military casualties took place here. South Armagh is like a roughly like 200 square mile area. We're talking about
yeah,
a rural area. That's 123 soldiers killed, 50 or 49 of which were killed by 1976. So that's a big chunk of them killed just in the first
yeah,
half of the 70s. 75 civilians, 42 RUC. The first two RUC men killed by the IRA, not killed in the conflict. First two killed by the IRA were killed in Crossmaglen by a
yeah,
car bomb. Largest taking of British Army life in one go. WARRENPOINT, of course, was done by them. They were also involved in a joint operation with the Nuri Brigade that resulted in the largest taking of RUC life in one go. That
yeah,
was a mortar attack. The 10-mile radius around the heart of South Armagh was home to 1,255 bomb attacks, 1,158 shooting incidents. What's believed to be the biggest bomb of the conflict, 3,500 pounder in September '92 outside the forensic lab was there as
yeah,
held from up to 12 miles away. Apparently, they were the first to use Semtex. They operate. We'll get into it, but they operated with a degree of autonomy that others didn't have. Stemming a lot from the fact that they were self-funded. They didn't have to go with their hand out looking for stuff. You have a lot more loose of a leash if that's the case. The leader, the continuous kind of leader throughout it, Slab Murphy, of course, family will discuss. By the '90s, he was deemed to be the biggest domestic threat to the UK. This was a man with no military, no formal military background. I mean, his background was out of a farmer. They were the first area to require proper deployment of the SAS, who previously had only been kind of attached to areas. Yeah, they required like the first special forces missions. So yeah, just go through a lot of this is from like the first bit of Bandit Country, but it
yeah,
really does illustrate how uniquely painful they were for the British Army to
yeah.
do.
Yeah, that's a really good summary. And there's like a couple of other things that kind of struck me just, flicking through it myself, because obviously after 25 years, you can't remember every single word you wrote. Um, but in 1994, there were a third of the British military's helicopter hours worldwide were in South Armagh, which I thought was kind of interesting. It just illustrates that British security forces have been driven off the roads. So they basically didn't operate on the roads; they only operated in the air, which I'm sure we'll get to, which is sort of a kind of a key thing because then obviously there was a big push by the IRA to try and bring down helicopters. and then the other one was mortars. So people might have heard of different types of mortars. So the Mark 10, so-called barrack buster mortar, for instance, that killed the was it nine, I think, REC or 10 REC
I
officers
think
in
it was
Newry.
around 8 or 9. It was something like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They were in a porter cabin in the Newry RUC station, and that was a barrack buster attack. But that was Mark 10, which obviously meant there'd been nine other types of mortars before then, but every single one of them, the sort of the prototype, the first version of it, had been fired in South Armagh. So South Armagh was extremely proficient at um, uh, bomb making, single shot sniping, which I'm sure we'll talk more about, mortars, building massive bombs, like you mentioned, the Forensic Lab one, which was designed to try to destroy a single piece of evidence, like I think a fragment of wood, um, to to stop an IRA man being convicted, which just goes to show the lengths they'll go. Although they didn't manage to do it, but they had a pretty good try. So the sort of the military technology and the military tactics that were developed there were also key. So it's a little bit because it was essentially, largely for many periods of time controlled by the IRA. It was kind of like a laboratory, like where you could test things. And obviously, a lot of that was done south of the border, but in terms of contact with the enemy, you could actually test it in South Armagh.
So no discussion about South Armagh would be kind of complete without the Murphy family, the Slab. Tom's the one that gets kind of called Slab, but I believe the nickname was one for the family in general because they were all kind of built. They're all kind
Yeah,
of built. His brother Paddy was a boxing champion, I believe.
yeah,
So yeah, it's the whole thing when you think about it, it's almost like a perfect storm. You kind of have, first of all, you have Slab's farm, which literally is on either side of the border. Constant nightmare for the security forces, given that given that for the most part they did respect the border and made an attempt to respect it at least.
yeah,
Um, Not always, but okay. So there's that. There's the fact that they were a smuggling family, so they already had a lot of the kind of network and to some degree some of the skills that would be required for guerrilla warfare, like keeping things quiet and trusting and having bonds that are built up over years. So yeah, they Slab I think is believed to have joined the IRA in '69. Um,
yeah.
for before there was actually we'll say kind of any like killings or action in South Armagh itself. Have you seen the you probably I think you referred to in the book. Have you seen that piece of footage? It's almost funny in hindsight, but
Yeah,
it was when it was when him and his brothers
pig smuggling.
yeah, I
Yeah,
swear to God, like the fact it's almost like quaint, like the fact that these lads who would go on to have 30 years of bombs and missiles and heavy machine guns and all sorts of shit, their biggest or one of their biggest issues at the time was getting harangued by this TV crew over like
yeah,
smuggling. And it's
yeah,
weird because like they won't want at first he kind of won't talk to the guy, but then he kind of does, and it almost turns awkward more than anything. It's hilarious almost in how
yeah. Totally agree. No, I saw that footage. In fact, I think the first person who sent it to me was a former British Army captain who I knew. Sent it to me. He says, "You got to see this," and it's incredible. And also for me, so it's hard to sort of remember in a way, but when I was researching this, there were no photos of Slab Murphy, Tom Murphy, beyond a really uh, blurry, out of focus shot from I think from the forecourts in Dublin during a court case where a photographer that I know had got him sort of through a window across a courtyard, and so he was
set
just
up like that or something.
no, so that was after that, but that's but yeah, that's not yeah, that was the next best photo. But yeah, that one, he's like this, and and you can sort of see him, and you can recognize him. But before that, it was just this, really blurry photo. So there were no photos of him. And I remember I found located like a lot of photos of him playing Gaelic football, um, and some old photos in newspapers after games and stuff. Um, I saw him in court because I went to the Sunday Times libel trial, which Murphy lost because the Sunday Times had named him as an IRA commander, and he sued them and he lost. And so I saw him throughout that trial and spoke to him. I tried to speak to him, and he said no comment. But yeah, he was this figure of sort of great mystery, and then just to see this footage on YouTube. So I guess if you Google probably pig smuggling South Armagh or something, it'll come up, and you see him there. It was kind of incredible, and as you say, almost like innocent times. I mean, a couple of years before the first, those two IEC officers, Donaldson and Miller, were killed in Crossmaglen, and before it all started. But it also speaks to this thing that you mentioned, which was, I guess a big part of the book was that this was always a place of rebellion and lawlessness and resistance to authority, and that's one of the reasons why the IRA was so effective down there, because it was sort of already in their DNA, and sort of just knowing the land and the weather and just the topography, and that was absolutely key to everything they did.
Okay, yeah, we won't get into it just for time's sake. But there's a really, really good chapter at the beginning of the book, which goes into like the multi-century and
Yeah,
multi-decade history of the area. It's funny, the name we'll go into how it got the name. The name Bandit Country, I believe, originated in like 75, but
from
it
Merlin Reese. Yeah,
indeed, yeah. But it's a nickname that could have applied to the area for, I mean, for decades, if not centuries before. Yeah,
yeah,
it was well embedded in the culture of the place to be,
yeah,
yeah, to be fighting British soldiers basically. Yeah.
yeah. And I was, it was funny because when I was writing the book, I was always very conscious of, like, obviously I'm British, um, and I worked for the Telegraph, sort of establishment conservative sort of paper. And so I just didn't want the book to be dismissed by 50% of the readership. And so I recognized a bit about the title, um, Bandit Country, because it was seen as like a pejorative thing, like a slur on the people. And that's kind of the way the more nationalist, like more SDLP type people would view it. But in the end, I just concluded that it was a badge of pride. So Alex Maskey, senior Belfast Republican, um, and he'd read. I think it was a commemoration, and he'd read. I can't remember whether it was the East Rising Proclamation or political speech, whatever. But then he'd hand it over to an IRA man. Actually, it's probably the IRA man that was going to um, read the proclamation, and he said, "Ah, from one bandit to another," and so I think it was a label of pride, and also I remember I had a conversation with Suzanne Breen at the time, and I said, "Oh, I don't know. I was thinking of calling it Fighting Men, like Fighting Men of Crossmaglen. I thought maybe that's, you know." And I remember Suzanne saying, "Oh, what the fuck else would you call it?" Or something like that. And I was like, "Okay, right." So I think it was sort of the right title.
In fact, I don't know if it was Merlin Reese, but someone's quoted that towards the end of the book as kind of regretting. It might have been Merlin. It was like regretting giving it that nickname because it just gave the place like an extra bit of an aura. Not that it needed it, but it gave the place a bit more of an extra mystique and a fucking ooh like a bugaboo thing.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's absolutely right. It did give it a sort of notoriety, and there was a big element of um, psychological element with South Armagh. I mean, British soldiers were freaking terrified of serving there. Later on, and we'll talk about it, but the sniper threat, and the sniper at work signs, and um, those sniper at work signs, which I think started appearing in '93, were absolutely notorious. And I remember talking to Pat Thompson, who was former IRA man who served a lot of time in prison. And I said to him, like, so who came up with the idea of the sniper at work signs? And he just smiled. He says, I don't know, but it fair caught the fucking imagination, didn't it? And so I think, the other signs like the sniper's promise and Richardson's fertilizer tested at home and abroad by provisional IRA, all that kind of stuff. I think it helped with fundraising here in the US and elsewhere. And I think it was part of a sort of a mind game with the British security forces.
Obviously, as well, British soldiers were in a position then where it must be very tempting to take down a sign like that, but they were booby trapped like fuck. Same with tricolors. I think from looking through there's a bit at the end that there's like a list at the end of Bandit Country that goes through all the deaths. It seemed to me that I think the 80s had maybe like probably a higher percentage of booby trap.
So, and again, a big part of this is like this sort of cat and mouse game or arms race between the British and the IRA. So, well, one side will make a sort of technological or tactical advance, and then the other side will neutralize it, so they'll shift to something else. But booby traps, obviously pretty crude. But there was a British soldier killed trying to take down a tricolour early in the Troubles, and so after that, whether or not those signs were booby trapped, they may well not have been. But nobody's going to try and test out the theory. And then also, I mean, there was an intimidation element to it. So I remember there was someone in Malaban in South Armagh who took down a sniper at work sign during the ceasefire after August 1994, and then had all their windows smashed. So there was you know, there's a feeling that you don't mess with that stuff, whether you're a local or whether you're in the British Army or whatever.
Okay, so I was gonna we'll get into the actual. We'll start with the 70s. We'll go chronologically. But one of the things that made the brigade so effective. This is a quote from Eamon Collins, quoting a fellow named Brendan Burns. He said, Brendan said it was quite simple. They had taken a number of people and they had worked with them over a period of years, gradually acclimatizing them to the type of warfare that they were going to be involved in rather than putting them in at the deep end early, which is what happened in urban areas. South Armagh developed a slow process of training a volunteer. They would have taken a few raw recruits and put them in with skilled people and took them on. They didn't push them too hard. They got them used to what they were going to be faced with over a period of years, as Brendan said. People working together in close proximity with each other, experience in operations, came to trust and depend on each other. In fact, they would have been loath to meet up with other people or to operate with volunteers outside their immediate circle. Another thing that feeds into this hugely, and something I'm going to draw some contrast with the East Tyrone Brigade, given that they were the other most prominent rural crowd. The South Armagh, over like the nearly 30 years of conflict, they only had a small few imprisoned, and I think lost only about nine like killed because of this, and because training in a guerrilla army, you don't have formal training. You really have to depend on the guys who do have a bit of knowledge and them to pass it down. Because they lost so few, you can have your experienced members lasting literally the entire conflict. So the new guys are getting trained up by very well experienced fellas. Some by the 90s, you could be getting trained by fellas who have literally like 2 decades of experience. This was that process was kind of disturbed in East Tyrone because I mean Loughgall, for example,
Yeah.
I think it was about 7 or 8 killed. I mean
Yeah.
that's nearly as many as the East or the South Armagh lost in the entire thing. So this
Yeah.
continuity of experience was a huge factor.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, it's obvious in a way, but if you have your top people going to prison for 18 years, then they're just out of the conflict. And so I don't know, it almost reminds me of like The Sopranos, where you have these top guys who go to prison, they come out and they're just completely kind of out of it. You know, they haven't experienced the world, they haven't caught up with sort of technology. But yeah, I mean, it was very noticeable to me. And Brendan Burns himself, you know, so Brendan Burns was an important IRA man who was one of the guys who was carried out the Narrowwater uh, massacre, where 18 British soldiers were killed in 1979, and he was blown up by his own bomb with along with Brendan Moley, I think in 1988. Um, but he was a guy who he'd worked on Slab Murphy's farm as a young man. He'd been involved in, so you call it dicking, which is basically just like spotting, and the British Army would call them like dicking screens. So before an attack, you'd send young guys who may not even be formally sort of volunteers, but you send out these young guys, you know, teenagers, um, out to observe and report back on British Army or IC movements, which obviously gives you, I'm sure it gives you kind of a thrill and a sense of being part of it and being on a military operation. But it just sort of gives you experience because you have a very small role, and so you can kind of be blooded and then given more responsibility, or moving weapons, like taking weapons from a cache and delivering them, or um, uh, if there was a body that that needed to be dealt with or whatever, then you'd have a couple of young volunteers, keep watch over it and keep lookout while you know things were organized. So the pace of rural life is kind of slower and more deliberate. And so I think that those comments by Burns to Eamon Collins, I think are significant because they point to the way this continuity, um, and very few. I mean, I could count them on one hand, really. Very few senior IRA men went to um, went to prison from South Armagh. So I think that's an important factor.
On the note of being on the note of Warren Point, which of course we'll get to, the surgeon Sean Hughes at the age of 17, 10, I mean 17 years old, he was mixing those bombs. I think they were fertilizer bombs, I believe.
Yeah,
On the you mentioned there about moving weaponry and stuff. The fact that they were in the countryside, it gave, and the fact that it was at one stage, well, not at one stage, it became pretty much a no-go zone. I mean, other than the air, it kind of was. Um, in terms of moving kit, in any urban area, there could be so many eyes on you just from people looking out their windows, and you'd have no idea. And it could just be like a civilian who passes on the odd bit of information. But in the
yeah,
countryside, there's just so many less houses you'll be passing. You'll like you can kind of narrow it down to if you pass three houses and maybe one of them isn't so friendly. It was probably them who informed. So being in the countryside as well, it allowed them like a freedom to be mixing stuff, to be, I mean, they fired mortars from the back of tractors. They turned a slurry spreader into it's essentially a flamethrower. These are things
yeah,
that you can probably experiment more in the countryside than you
yeah,
ever would in like a town or a city, you
yeah.
know.
At the same time, though, so you had the watchtowers, but and they could see a lot, and the IRA never knew, obviously, at any given time exactly what their capabilities were, but they couldn't see everything. So there's dead ground, and so the IRA would know exactly, if there's like a hill or something in between the ground you're operating in and the watchtower, you can't be seen. So the IRA, had to adapt um, to those towers. Um, and also, I mean, in urban areas, the fact that there's lots of things going on and lots of vehicles and movements, that can actually help you, because you can hide amongst all that stuff. Whereas if you're in a British Army tower and you spend 6 weeks there, and all you're doing is watching what happens on the roads, and you see a tractor that you've never seen before, then you might suspect that something's up. So it kind of it works both ways as well.
On the watchtowers, it's funny it was never kind of quite known by the IRA or by the locals kind of what they were quite capable of. There was you get rumors that they could like eavesdrop conversation miles away, and they would have like cameras that could see very far. I think they would there was almost like a psyop
Yeah,
kind of aspect too, in that they would intentionally put up some weird looking aerial or some
yeah.
box on the thing, and the locals, oh, what's that? It's a new thing, and it would kind of it's kind of play in their imagination, like.
So that's the psyops working the other way. Yes. So apparently there were like cardboard boxes that would be cut into sort of odd shapes, and they would be put up on the towers, or you put up some, massive, I don't know, fishing rod or something that looked like an aerial, yeah, as a kind of a mind game. And then also, there was a big propaganda campaign. Obviously there was genuine um, anger that these watchtowers were blighting the landscape. But there was also a propaganda campaign saying that they caused cancer and birth deformities and all this kind of stuff. Um, and the downside of that is obviously lots of ordinary. I guess some of the IRA men were probably just like chuckling at the grief the Brits were getting because of this stuff. But if you're just a regular person in South Armagh, you probably you have young kids and stuff. You probably become you know scared that actually there is bad stuff coming from these towers and stuff. So it's kind of a complicated thing.
And of course, just the presence of watchtowers, but it does add to the whole occupation thing.
Oh yeah, and there's definitely, and in fact, there's an SAS man who's quoted in there who's saying it's like a Maginot Line. Um, it's stuff the French did in Vietnam and Algeria, and it's a sign of occupation, and it means you're static, and so you're sort of reactive. You obviously you're providing a target, you're providing a justification really for every teenager to want to join the IRA because it's like, well, they've taken part of our Gaelic football pitch and they've put a watchtower overlooking your farm. I mean, it's as basic as that. So I think the towers were hugely important as like surveillance platforms and like bases from where um, British security forces could operate. But there was definitely a downside as well, and obviously they've all gone now.
Okay, so let's get into the actual like trends of attacks through the thing. We'll start the 70s, obviously. One major kind of defining feature of the first half of the 70s. Obviously, in general, most of the death and kind of general activity of the IRA was in the 70s, and more so kind of in the beginning and mid. This is also reflected in South Armagh, kind of like it is anywhere else.
Yeah,
Um, okay, so we'll go through some of the roadside bombs and mines, which eventually led to the area getting the unique treatment of pretty much of having like a no road policy.
yeah.
Um, but where's the first one? Okay, so the first one, I believe, 72, um, February 10th, two soldiers killed, died in their Land Rover when it was blown up by an IRA landmine in Freeduff near Collyhanna. But then and was that same year, 72? Yeah, same year in July, there was another three killed. IRA landmine detonated by command wire while on patrol in a ferret scout car on the Carron Road in
Mm,
Crossmaglen. Then, literally 2 months later, in late August, a 19-year-old soldier blown up by an IRA landmine packed into a beer barrel and detonated by command wire while on patrol in ferret scout car near Crossmaglen. Then 73, April 7th, two killed soldiers, that is, blown up by IRA command wire culvert bomb as their Land Rover drove along the Carragravati Road near Newton Hamilton. Volunteer Jim Martin found guilty of the two murders, but convictions were squashed on appeal. The next one, I believe, was the one that was kind of the nail in the coffin of the British Army going on the road. It was October 9th, 75, and it was on a Saracen, a culvert bomb, hit an armored personnel vehicle and killed one. And then I believe the decision was made to no longer have vehicle patrols on the road. Very, very, very significant.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you know, I mean, I've driven those roads a lot, and in fact, my kind of methodology in this was whenever I knew that there'd been an attack or an incident historically, I would always locate where it was and drive the route. And it's interesting how much you can learn by doing that. So the Breen and Buchanan incident, where the two IEC officers were killed in '89, I think, um, uh, and they just come from the Dundalk Garda station, just driving the road, and sometimes with like kind of a stopwatch, so you can kind of work out the timings. But yeah, I mean, it's just apparent by just driving through there, the number of resources you'd have to devote to sort of clearing a route, like so, and I saw it a lot in Iraq and Afghanistan of, I counter ID operations where you know you, you have to clear a route before you go through. But then the trouble is when you clear a route, that means you're slow and you have to put soldiers out on the roads, which means that they're targets for for snipers. And so I think it just became so labor intensive, and everything you do, you expose yourself to different types of attacks. It just didn't make sense. And obviously, if you're a British soldier, and again, I saw this in Afghanistan, where you have British soldiers having to clear roads with metal detectors, but they knew that the Taliban had developed IDs that had no metal in them, like so they were just like plastic parts, and so you might as well be searching the road with a golf club, and if you're a British soldier, it's like freaking terrifying that the next step you take, you may just be blown to pieces. And so if you can imagine, you know, somebody a British soldier in 1975 driving a ferret vehicle along the roads, South Armagh, I mean, and soldiers are human beings. And it just sort of becomes hard to operate in that environment. So yeah, so that forced the British Army and then by extension the IEC off the roads. But then you have so much helicopter traffic that becomes a new phase of the war where you're trying to take down helicopters, and you're obviously you're presenting a lot of targets. And if you have to bring a helicopter into, say, Crossmaglen Security Force Base, you have to go in the hover, just before you land, and you're presenting a static target for a few seconds. And so, yeah, I mean, one of the fascinating things about writing about this was just the change over time. And it's like, you know, so the IRA makes a move, and then the British security forces make a move, and then the IRA makes a counter move, or somebody does something different. And at the same time, also simultaneously, there's all these different things going on tactically, technologically, and I guess probably later on, like politically as well.
Um, One of the things about it is like any role. I mentioned it before. My great granddad was an OC during the War of Independence down in West Cork, and I like principally a lot of the warfare, the kind of guerrilla warfare, would be very similar in that like you're dealing with a similar type of environment. You're talking about fields, fairly narrow country roads. There's kind of only so many, so you can kind of vary your route all you want, but you're gonna have to return to certain ones. The locals know the area way better than any British soldier ever will. Oh yeah, so I mentioned about the War of Independence because A lot of it, on principle, kind of is the same type of attacks, the same type of weaponry. They had rifles back then. They had rifles in the Troubles, but obviously way better. They had landmines back then, but the ones they have now way more reliable. You can have remote and stuff. They were kind of notoriously unreliable back then. Um, we'll get onto it because it's a sub conflict, but a completely new dimension to that was helicopters because obviously
Yeah,
the War of Independence crowd, if you had told them that their descendants would be carrying on this fight, but they would also have to be dealing with these flying metal death machines, that would be, that'd be quite something. It's funny now. Jim Lina to kind of contrast with the East Tyrone again. Jim Lina from reading in prison, from reading Mao, he became there was not obsessed, but he got the idea of like autonomous zones in his head.
yeah,
Funny, it's almost ironic that Slab, and I don't mean this as an insult at all, has probably never read a book on like political philosophy or anything like that, but he actually had this kind of autonomous zone that Liner wanted,
yeah,
despite not even probably knowing the term. I from
yeah. I think that's absolutely right. So, so you mentioned the slurry tanker attack. So that to me was fascinating. So there were two attacks in the 90s on Baruki Sanger. So Baruki Sanger was this like fortified post that was built in across McLean Security Force base, and it was named after Private James Baruki, I believe, who was a paratrooper who'd been killed in Cross McGlen. And so it was a sort of huge target because it's like it jutted out onto the square in Cross McGlen, and there were two attacks there which very nearly killed people inside. And one of them, it was a lorry that drove past and like sprayed petrol all over the Sanger, which is metal. Then it was set alight, and basically the soldiers in there are like cooking, like I think they were taking turns to go in the shower to sort of cool down before the rescue force could get there. And so I managed to get access to a lot of British Army and RUC reports, which were, incredibly useful. And from memory, one of these reports said, this attack shows the audacity and innovative nature of South Armagh um, uh, provisional IRA by coming up with this totally new tactic. But then I found, from uh, I think the War of Independence, but anyway, maybe it was the border campaign. I think it was before then, um, of this potato sprayer that had been used to attack the security force base in Cross McGlen. And again, it had been turned into a flamethrower. So it was something decades earlier. And so someone like, Tom Murphy, that's just sort of in the psyche, really. Or, you could just imagine, um, a bunch of IRA men, who are also sort of farmers sitting around the table, just like shooting the breeze. But what can we do? And then you can just imagine some old guy says, I remember my father telling me about this, this attack we did in, 1921 or whatever it was. And that's the idea. So there's a sort of uh there's a thing with military people, and so Liner and Tom Murphy, both sort of famous IRA men. Um, but there's the sort of the people who um, have a lot of education, whether it's self-taught or in prison or whatever, and are kind of quite intellectual about it. And then you have other people where it's just sort of instinctive. I don't think Tom Murphy has any kind of education beyond just, secondary school. Um, but and obviously this again is a feature of insurgencies in Afghanistan and Iraq. Just because somebody's just, wearing flip-flops and, a dish dasher or whatever, or a flat cap and, a pair of dungarees, doesn't mean they're stupid. And so that's a thing about South Armagh, that there's a sort of native wit and intelligence, which I think is just, part of living there and being from there.
Right. Okay. So, if I obviously I'd advise anyone buy the book, and when you do, there's a big list at the back, like I said, of all the deaths that occurred. Of the 70s, first half of the 70s, in particular, really busy. By 1976, 49 British soldiers had been killed. Bearing in mind that 123 were killed in South Armagh, the whole thing. So this was like almost half of that versus two IRA killed. Just to go into the IRA's first loss in terms of suffering a death there, that was in 1973. It was Michael McEvery in his mid-30s shot by RUC while attacking the Keady Security Force base. He had previously had his hand blown off while preparing a mortar. RUC apparently believed him to be involved in about 20 26 people's killing. It speaks to how busy they were. Like he was killed in November, but in November, either side of McEvery's killing, there were soldiers who they had killed. So it speaks to the busyness of the time. Um,
Yeah, and that was across um, Northern Ireland. So, and another thing is yeah. So I guess both sides are sort of going hell for leather, and they're making mistakes, and uh, it's just a more sort of intense phase of the conflict. And then as you get later on, it's sort of the deaths matter more. I mean, obviously to the family, it doesn't, it's terrible whenever it happens, but there's like a kind of a political impact element to the attacks, and particularly depending on the sort of the audacity of the attack or the numbers killed in a single incident, like so you mentioned that IEC killed in Newry. So there's a kind of it's just a different environment in terms of publicity, politics, as well as militarily.
I believe what was their second, the South Armagh's second loss in terms of someone being killed. 75 June 4th. It was a 21-year-old Francis Jordan shot dead by the army while planting a bomb outside a Protestant pub in Besbrook. We'll get onto sniper later on. When you look through that list, that there is the occasional sniper kill. Nowhere near the reliability and kind of effectiveness that they would later get with the Barrett. But there is like dotted.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, so there was like Sean McStoyfen, a famous IRA guy, early in the Troubles, who talked about in 1972 he wrote a book, I think, Memoirs of a Revolutionary, and he talked about one-shot sniping as the theory of the guerrilla rifle, is the phrase he used. Um, and South Armagh had developed a particularly effective unit. So that's as early as 1972.
yeah, I was going to say I heard a quote. I think it was from Chairman Mao. He says guerrilla soldiers have to be really good at running away. Yeah, because you're taking on British Army, one of the best, objectively speaking, one of the best armed forces in the world. Um, one contrast there between East Tyrone and South Armagh, and this is very much reflected in the amount of losses they took, was their kind of ambitiousness, we'll say. The East Tyrone crowd, for one thing, they had no problem traveling. I mean, Loughgall isn't even in Loughgall, their most devastating loss wasn't even in Tyrone.
Yeah,
The South Armagh crowd were known a lot more for kind of being more risk averse, kind of staying within their capabilities, not having like the type of attacks that East Tyrone would be most famous for. What
yeah,
the attack that Loughgall would have been. There was the Ballygally barracks and the Birches too, but they were operations that had like a lot of moving parts. Like you'd have fellas shooting and fellas going in, putting in a bomb. To the South Armagh crowd wouldn't be quite as like kind of ambitious or flamboyant, if
yeah.
you will.
I
They would
think
use
that's right. I think that's right. So it's a bit goes to speak to what Brendan Burns said about taking things slowly, introducing young volunteers to operations, and not just kind of winging it, you know? Um, and I think it's more of a factor of rural operations as well. And obviously, East Tyrone's largely rural as well, but you can be sort of more deliberate and careful. And, and I think I think South Armagh realized um, that, I think it was the Bobby Sands um, saying, you need to, was it Bobby Sands who said, maybe it wasn't Bobby Sands. He said, we, it was after, no, it wasn't Bobby Sands because it was after the,
We're talking about the you have to be lucky always, we have to be lucky
yeah,
once.
that's right. I think it was after the Brighton bomb. You know, you were lucky this time, um, but you have to be lucky every time. We only have to be lucky once. And so, I mean, I think the IRA across the board, but certainly South Armagh, um, they realized that um, there's no point in having an operation that, say, kills two police officers, three volunteers get killed or arrested. That's not a successful operation. So you're better off calling it off and doing an operation the other day than another day, if you just sense something's wrong. And so certainly later on, in the Troubles, it was the case that, I don't know, like 9 out of 10 of IRA operations might be abandoned before they sort of reach completion because they saw a British soldier somewhere where they weren't expecting. They saw somebody standing on a street corner. They they just got spooked by something, and it may have been nothing, but it's just sort of not worth taking the risk. And I think there's a lot of pride in South Armagh that East Tyrone was kind of brought to its knees really by the British, by SAS attacks on Lochgall, and a lot of volunteers were killed and arrested, and they have I believe a lot of problems with recruiting because there's this phrase sometimes, oh, if you create martyrs and people rush to join up. Well, people are also human beings, and they might want to join the IRA, but they don't want to get killed in the first year. They may be dedicated, but that only goes so far. So I think it was easier to recruit in South Armagh as well because the chances of getting killed or imprisoned were just lower. So yeah, and I just think again, it just seemed to me to be part of the psyche that let's not rush this. Let's take our time. Let's do it right. Because you know, it's not effective for us if we just get killed or imprisoned.
Also, geography plays such an important factor. If you look at South Armagh on a map, it's roughly like that. It kind of dips down into it, and a lot more of the South Armagh area is border.
Yeah.
So much of it you can launch an attack from just inside the border and quickly shag off them behind it. There was plenty of times where they fired from over the border. WARRENPOINT bomb was remoted from over the border. Yeah, the East Tyrone crowd, obviously the bottom of East Tyrone is border, but they were known for they were known for I mean sometimes driving like an hour and a half kind of from their area and doing that. Um yeah, not
I also think we haven't really talked about informers, and maybe that will come in at some point. But um, I mean, I think it's possible. But I'm sure that South Armagh did have its informers and were penetrated at some point. And I think, for instance, actually since Bandit Country, I've had a number of indications that the sniper arrest at the Craig and Duff farm, where Mihal Caraher and Bernard McGinn and Seamus McCardle and those guys were all captured. But there was an informer involved. So I don't think it's the case that um, South Armagh was never penetrated, but East Tyrone was a lot more penetrated, and so again, I think the nature of South Armagh is such that because we're really talking about 6 or 8 extended families that were running the South Armagh IRA Brigade. and very few outsiders. And in fact, one of the outsiders was Bernard McGinn, who was from County Monaghan, um, who did break under interrogation after that sniper arrest in '97. Um, so I think their unwillingness to bring in outsiders, to talk to outsiders, their autonomy from Belfast, um, and the Republican leadership, because they were sort of self funding, meant that they weren't nearly as penetrated by informers, and that's a very significant factor in their success as well.
They were notoriously well. They're notoriously untrusting of those not from their area, and particularly a lot of the Belfast kind of command and IRA men generally, especially SCAP. Apparently they kind of famously kept SCAP at arms.
Cappuccino, yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah,
didn't trust it. I'm sure that has a lot to do with their success too.
yeah. And there's a bit where Patsy O'Callaghan um says to Eamon Collins. So Eamon Collins was a Newry guy, so he wasn't especially trusted by the South Armagh Brigade. But Newry and South Armagh would do a lot of joint operations, and so somebody had told um, Eamon Collins to talk to Belfast about safe houses with connection to the so-called Nutting Squad, run by Steak Knife Fred Scappaticci. And Patsy O'Callaghan got to hear about this, and he said, "What the fuck are you doing? I don't care who the fuck told you. You don't talk to anybody else about safe houses. Basically, you keep it within the South Armagh area." And I thought, that was really interesting. And Bernard McGinn, he was from County Monaghan, so really just I think like 7 miles away from the border. And he'd met Frank McCabe, um, famous South Armagh volunteer in prison, um, and and so um, McGinn was kind of brought into the fold. But he said when he gave his statement to the IEC that it took him 4 or 5 years, and he was a convicted IRA man who served his time. It took them 4 or 5 years to trust him, and that's from somebody who's literally just down the road.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, one of the very few of that crowd to actually be in prison. One shot McCabe. One of the I guess kind of one of the cooler nicknames from it too. Okay, so we the South Armagh Brigade were kind of known, and in fairness, on some level, even I've heard from ex-security forces kind of respected on a level due to the fact that most, I mean, like all the vast majority of their operations were purely against security forces, British Army. They did occasionally target civilians too. That did happen. There was like you would have like Protestant farmers and stuff who were.
Yeah,
uh,
and Kingsmill,
I've just
um,
about to mention literally, arguably the worst sectarian killing of the whole lot. It was done under the
the Republican Action Force, was it? Or it was
yeah,
done under a cover name. Yeah,
exactly, under a cover name. I believe some of the guns from it were later like traced, like found on
yeah,
their mad lads. Yeah, I think everyone it's kind of well accepted that it was them and it wasn't actually some
yeah, yeah, yeah,
out of them.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
so
but the context, obviously not wishing by any means to justify it, but the context was, you know, sectarian killings on both sides. So that was a reaction to sectarian killings of Catholics. And
remember.
I remember, yeah, and I remember putting that to PJ Carraher, and he was basically, and it's in the book, he was basically, well, it finished it, didn't it? It finished. So that's, you know, I mean, you know, the response similar with Mountbatten, the IRA sort of response is, well, yeah, we regret all death, but it's a war and people get killed, which is, it's not dissimilar to what you might hear from, you know, an American Marine commander when, a compound gets blown up and a bunch of women and children are killed in Afghanistan. So, there is, war's a dirty, ugly, horrible thing, and people get killed.
Kingsmill, of course, would prompt something very, very significant happening, which was the proper deployment of the SAS in the area. I believe the area was deemed to be like a special emergency area or something. The SAS had they had been attached to other units and I think had done like some kind of covert work, but in terms of properly deploying,
Yeah,
this was the first time. It speaks to how seriously South Armagh was taken, that it required their elite, the best of the best from them. I mean, you could argue that the SAS were and are one of the best, if not the best, special forces units in the world. Their the first SAS kill in the conflict was Peter Cleary, who was arrested in Fork Hill, and then under kind of disputed circumstances, they say that while they were about to kind of waiting for him to be loaded into a helicopter, and he tried to run and got away, or tried to get away and was killed. That was their
yeah,
first successful ambush against an IRA unit by special forces in the conflict was in January 77, and that was when Seamus Harvey was killed. He was from
yeah.
Drummock.
That one was interesting because I mean, I remember the researching the Seamus Harvey thing, and I had a document, British Army document that I managed to get, and it had a signature on it, like a kind of quite distinctive squiggly signature, which I couldn't read, um, on the incident report. And I remember like sort of waking up in the middle of the night, um, realizing that I'd seen that signature before, and it was then General Michael Rose, um, and it was the Iranian embassy siege. So he'd been in charge of that, and he'd taken over kind of command of the situation from the police, Metropolitan Police, and he'd signed a bit of paper. And it's like that sort of eureka moment. I woke up in the middle of the night thinking, I remember now I remember, and I put the two together, and so that told me that a young Michael Rose, as an SAS troop commander or whatever, had been in command of that operation. And um, and interestingly, Rose complained. So after Bandit Country was published, he complained that I'd put his life at risk by revealing his name. And one of the executives at the publisher wanted to immediately cave in. It was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry," and everything. And I was like, that makes no sense. He's a four-star general. We know that he was in the SAS. How could he possibly be more in danger? Because he was involved in that incident. And there's there's this organization called the D Notice Committee in the Ministry of Defense, where you can give them a manuscript, and they'll try and prevail on you to not to reveal certain things. And I guess in return, they kind of agree not to try and get the book pulped or sue you or whatever. So it's kind of a not a great system really, but it's kind of like a you know push pull kind of thing, and you deal with them at arm's length. But to give them to give him great credit, the head of the D Notice Committee, the publisher already caved in to Rose and said, "Okay, we'll take it out of future editions." And I was like, "This makes no sense." And and so I kind of appealed to the head of the D Notice Committee, who was a retired rear admiral, and he backed me up. And so Rose's name in connection with the James Harvey incident remained. So it's just kind of one of those like interesting things. So I guess I was pretty pleased with myself that I managed to recognize this signature from two completely different environments. So, just as an author, you don't want to give stuff hard fought stuff, discoveries. You don't want to give that stuff up.
On the SAS note, the SAS got their first kills against the East Tyrone crowd on February 26th, 78. They lay in wait for 2 days and ambushed two members, shooting both, killing one. So yeah, when the SAS came in, it changed things. It changed things quite a bit, and kind of upped the stakes for the rural lads where they're mostly deployed. I obviously Niraq's disappearance and death took place in this time. It's been kind of I don't want to go into it too much because it's been kind of
Yeah,
talk to death, and we've all kind of heard. I've done other episodes on it too. Let me take us to the end of the 70s. Like I said, 70s had the most activity and kind of kills generally. There was we went through the landmine and roadside bombs. There was just general kind of ambushes and killings. There was the occasional sniper kill that would come along. The end of the day after Slab's birthday, I'm sure has nothing to do with it, but the coincidence, it was 27th of August 79, played host to the biggest loss of life for the British Army during this conflict.
so sometimes it's called WARRENPOINT, which is the nearest town. I always call it Narrow Water because that's kind of the more precise geographical kind of point. Um, but yeah, so I believe the largest number of British Army killed in the Troubles, 18.
Yeah, yeah, it was.
Yeah. So and most of them from the parachute regiment.
I was going to say
Um,
that would mean more that would mean more to a Republican.
yeah, obviously Bloody Sunday. Um, although I think the operation was originally conceived to kill Royal Marines, but they're all sort of targets. But yeah, so basically that operation was extremely sort of sophisticated and clever, and also lucky, I guess, or unlucky depending on which way you view it. But right by Narrowwater Castle, which is like this Elizabethan like little castle, very beautiful spot. Although apparently they're going to put a bridge over the Cooley Peninsula, and I saw some drawings of the bridge. It just looks absolutely horrendous. I don't know why you would need to put a bridge on in such a beautiful place when you could just drive around. Anyway, but the border, runs through the between the County Down and the Republic, um, runs through uh, Carlingford Lock, it's called, um, separating County Down from the Cooley Peninsula. And so, what the IRA had realized, because they'd done another attack there before with a bomb at Narrowwater Castle, is that logically, in terms of British operation, British Army sort of tactics and procedures and whatever, that the incident control point would be at this gatehouse, which was just a couple hundred yards away. And so what they did was, Brennan Burns and Joseph Brennan, who were the two IRA men, they were on the other side of the lock in the Irish Republic. They were on the button, and so they used like there was an old tower. They used that as the point at which to line up, and so there were a bunch of British Army vehicles with paratroopers in them, and they were driving uh, along that road. And so when I think the last vehicle, or maybe it was just before the last vehicle, kind of crossed the line of sight to the tower, um, Burns pushed a button, and this trailer, which was loaded with hay, which was right by the castle, just exploded, and I think six paratroopers were killed in the last vehicle, which contained eight paratroopers. And I interviewed one of them, a guy called Tom Cockey, who survived terrible burns, 35% burns, and he sort of described it just absolutely kind of horrific. Um, and so Burns and Brennan, they armed a second bomb. So there was a second bomb at the gatehouse, which was the incident they kind of calculated was almost certainly be the incident control point. And so they used, it was called a memo park timer. So for like in the old days of before iPhones, tell you when your parking was expired. So it's like a timing device. And again, the IRA, and particularly South Armagh, was very good at improvising, um, using kind of common technology to use improvised devices. And so they armed this bomb and they set it for 30 minutes. And it worked from the IRA point of view to sort of perfection, because the incident control point was set up. You had helicopters flying in. You had Lieutenant Colonel David Blair, who was the commanding officer, the Queen's Own Hussars, I think, who landed there. There was a major called Fursman from the parachute regiment. They were all there, and inside that gatehouse, they packed into milk churns all these explosives, an even bigger bomb. And so that detonated 30 minutes later, kind of when the British Army was kind of, you know, getting, taking control of the incident, evacuating. Like a Lynx, so Tom Cockey was in a Lynx, which had just taken off. And then the gatehouse explodes and kills 12 more soldiers. And Tom Cockey, I remember, I mean, I interviewed him in Belfast, and it was a very emotional interview. And he's in terrible pain. He knows that a bunch of his mates have just been killed, and the explosion is so strong that like the tail of the Lynx is kind of buffeted in the air as he's being flown off to hospital, and just absolute carnage. Heads in the lock and bits of flesh on the trees, and just horrendous sort of scene. That's what happens when bombs go off. But from the IRA point of view, I mean, actually, Tom Cockey mentioned to me the graffiti in Newry, and I'm sure elsewhere. We got 18 and Mountbatten. Now, the reference to Mountbatten is that over on the other side of the country, Mountbatten was killed, which was also a South Armagh operation that day. So, for the South Armagh IRA, it really, if they weren't on the map already, it really sort of put them on the map, and particularly Tom Murphy as I mean, I think he was British, identify him as sort of an intelligence officer, but I don't know exactly what position he had, but certainly he was a top commander in South Armagh by that point. And, I think that's one of the things that led him to becoming the IRA chief of staff eventually.
Yeah, like you said, two bombs, half an hour apart. They were both around 800 pounders, but both fertilizer, I believe. From
Yeah,
that first one, I think I read that one of them killed in the first one of that six. Literally, the only thing that was left of him, I think, was his pelvis, and it was like welded, essentially, like melted into the seat from the strength of the bomb. Um, yeah. Okay. So yeah, like you mentioned, they nearly got a bonus. They nearly took out a helicopter, kind of a mistake too. This demonstrates as well. It demonstrates that they were an adaptable and like a good learning unit. They kind of detected their patterns. They figured where they would put this kind of incident control point. Um, this all, yeah, this speaks to even the locals. Actually, it was well known that like after a while, the locals, because there's only so many places you can put covert observation posts and places to hide and ambush. The locals know the roads and the bends and everything way better
yeah,
than. So yeah, it would get to the stage where locals could almost kind of think like the military. They would you mentioned the book that like often farmers would go down kind of beating their hedges with sticks, and if they saw soldiers, they wouldn't let on anything. They pretend like they didn't, and they go reporting it. So yeah,
yeah.
the whole
Or
the
just the way, like the cattle, again, if you're like a farming person, just the way the cattle might move in a field, because if there's an observation post with a couple of SAS guys sort of in there, the cattle will sort of move away. Just that kind of intuitive stuff. And then, of course, with the British Army, they're coming in for 6-month tours or 9-month tours, and it's just this, you know, cir circulation thing all the time. And so they're having to learn everything almost from nothing, in a 6 or a 9-month tour. And I saw it in Afghanistan, where there was 6-month tours, And it was kind of, in a way, disastrous for the British because that meant the first month is sort of handing over, you know, from the previous unit. And then the next month is just kind of learning the ropes. Then you maybe have 3 months where you're kind of operating at sort of full effectiveness. And then the last month, you're preparing to hand over again. And also, again, soldiers are human. They don't want to take risks in that last month. So a lot of stuff doesn't really happen in that last month. And that was a sort of the cycle in South Armagh. And, um, so this unit, the IRA had seen where the incident control point would be if you set off a bomb at narrow water. Now, if you'd had continuity with the British Army. Now, they learned this, and they would have continuity officers based in the brigade headquarters who might serve 2 or even 3 year tours, who would try and liaise with the battalion that was coming in. But yeah, if you'd had a continuity, you would have known that there'd been a previous attack there. That's where the incident control point was. So you'd maybe have, I mean, limited possibilities there, but you might have had 2 or 3 different places where there might be an incident control point, and then maybe you reduce the chances of them being that lucky, by 75%, which is kind of, significant.
I can only imagine how terrifying it would be. First of all, to be worried to be sitting in the back of a Saracen or a Jeep or the trucks that the WARRENPOINT the soldiers were caught in. Be terrified the thought that you're just sitting there. It's not like you can engage the enemy. You're kind of sitting duck and something explodes and there's nothing you can do. But and then it would be further terror instilled by the fact that like the military has built up these good practical procedures like setting up an instant point. But then you realize, oh shit, they've actually kind of figured out our moves and they're like 2 steps ahead, kind of. I can only imagine how scary it would be.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, when you're young, you think about these things a lot less. And, there's a lot of stuff I did when I was young that I maybe wouldn't do now. But yeah, I mean, in Afghanistan, I remember kind of, accompanying US forces and British forces in Afghanistan. You're walking down a road and you just, the next step you take, you could just be blown to pieces. And the same with vehicles. I mean, I remember getting a briefing from this US Army sergeant in Iraq, and I was going from, I think it was Al Assad base to Baghdad, and the briefing was just freaking terrifying. And I remember just getting into this vehicle and thinking, well, there's nothing I can do really. So I just sat there and I put my hands over my balls basically, and just thought I'm just going to go to sleep, and I hope when I wake up everything's going to be okay, and it was. But sometimes you just have to put your life into the hands of other people and just fate, really.
Okay, so that was 79. In the early 80s, the IRA kind of suffered a loss. There was but yeah, May 81, 3 4-man teams from the Royal Jackets assumed the ambush position close to the border, to the east of the Belfast Dublin Road. Intelligence had been received that the IRA planned to hijack vehicles or mount an illegal roadblock to mark the death of Bobby Sands. After 40 hours in position, one of the team commanders spotted 3 IRA men with rifles moving along the line of the river about 15 yards away. They shouted a challenge and opened fire. The gunmen fired back and ran, but only one was wounded, managed to escape. Volunteer Kevin Donegan from Drummond was arrested, while his brother James got across the border, was pinned down from fire from Green Jackets and arrested by the Irish Army. The 12 soldiers fired nearly 700 rounds. Now, 2 months after this, um, probably in terms of like tactics and being having the ability to kind of outfox like what was a well laid plan. I've spoken about this one before, but there was an anti roadblock effort which basically involved an army team that was gonna like engage the actual thing, and then like 3 or 4 kind of support units, if you will. Um, where was Yeah, okay, so one of the 5 ambush teams was in a scrapyard, actually not a just along the border from Slab's farm. Again, it was expected that the IRA roadblock was going to be set up, and the aim was for the trigger team to initiate the ambush, while the other four teams covered the possible escape routes. The Bravo and trigger teams were hiding in old vans in the scrapyard. The events which followed were later used by Army instructions to emphasize the importance of selecting the right ambush positions, the danger of locals acting as eyes and ears, and the need to withdraw all teams if if it had been suspected that one had been compromised. That did happen. It's believed that the locals spotted one of the teams in the scrapyard, which may have been used before, mind
Yeah,
you. Okay, so the following afternoon, the Delta team withdrew after it was seen by a woman. At the same time, Charlie team observed an old man beating hedgerows with a stick. That evening, a farmer spent 3 hours cutting his hedges, and the Alpha team commander, now certain he and his men had been compromised, decided to pull out. Moments later, the van containing three members of Bravo team was riddled with more than 250 bullets fired from 6 or 7 gunmen using an M60 belt-fed machine gun and Armalite from behind a hedge 160 yards away across the border. Lance Corporal Gavin Dean, the Bravo team commander, was killed, and Rifleman John Moore, who I know is alive and well,
yeah,
won a military medal, was seriously wounded. Army investigators concluded that Dean's team had been seen on the first day, allowing the IRA to recce the area, select a firing position. Bravo's van had been used by soldiers, yeah, 2 weeks earlier, and cigarette buns had been left. The incident illustrated the danger of undercover operations in South Armagh, where anything out of the ordinary was likely to be spotted and passed on. So yeah, this was like a prime example of them being able to kind of be like chess players and kind of be like 2 steps ahead of
yeah. I think what year was that?
as 81, I believe. I think it
Okay, so I think the towers went in 80, started going in 83. And so that's one of the impetuses, that kind of incident, to have the towers as static observation posts rather than these improvised observation posts, because there's only so many times you can uh, there's only so many different places where you can have observation posts, and obviously every single time you use them, if you don't, if you know, it's kind of field discipline to not leave cigarette butts and sweet papers and stuff. And you know, everything, you know, shit in a bag and take it with you when you leave, all that kind of stuff, you know, military stuff. Um, but you know, mistakes are made, or you could just be observed. And obviously that kind of information, as there was a covert observation post in that scrapyard, that's absolute, like, you know, dynamite information for the IRA, and they'll just use it and observe, you know, they'll observe it, and you know, that was part of the war down there. And I guess the step to counteract that was to put up these towers, which is an incredible operation to do that, and soldiers were killed, you know, putting them in, and then they became targets. And we you know, we talked about the sort of psychological effect of them, but that meant that they needed to use like fewer, you know, observation posts, which they just improvised on the ground.
what one aspect of the whole story and the book that's like particularly fascinating and kind of you really wouldn't make the link between like Libya and Ireland or Gaddafi and Ireland, but there was a very significant one. Apparently Slab himself in like 76 had even gone over there, had done a bit of training, and then
Yeah,
the link was kind of reestablished by Joe Cahill apparently then in yeah
it,
in kind of the mid 80s,
yeah,
given that America and Britain had kind of upped their efforts against
yeah,
yeah, can you take us into this fascinating aspect
yeah,
of
yeah. So incredible, and also very, very significant for the IRA, because the Semtex came from Libya. I mean, originally came from Czechoslovakia, but um, it was bought from or supplied by Libya. So, so yeah, so um, you know, the IRA would align itself with, you know, revolutionary, anti-British um, regimes wherever it could. Um, And one of those was Libya. It started in the I think the early 70s, and Joe Cahill went to prison. You know, very famous IRA man, now dead. Um, and yes, but that was reactivated in the mid 80s. And I remember, uh, there were British jets sent to bomb Libya, and so Gaddafi is obviously an enemy of the British state and is prepared to help anybody um, who, you know, the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of thing. And so, but it's incredible to me that this farmer, um, Tom Murphy, a very sort of simple person in many respects, is flying to, I think he went, 9 times to the Mediterranean in the mid 80s to meet with, I think Nasser Ashur was the name of the guy who was the sort of Libyan intelligence officer. And he's this sort of guy in these sharp suits, this sort of effete, sort of well-groomed, sort of diplomat type guy. And he's meeting with Tom Murphy. You can just imagine what the conversation might have been like. Presumably, it would have been well, I don't know, maybe even if they were speaking English, that may have needed a translator. Um, but it was incredibly important. I mean, the weaponry that came in from Libya sustained the IRA for like 2 decades, and and Tom Murphy again. I got some incredible like sort of court documents um, related to this, which enable me to sort of paint the sort of picture of exactly how it happened, including Tom Murphy, wading out, you know, to his waist to bring clog a strand to bring weapons in himself. It's incredible. And Kevin McKenna, another IRA chief of staff who's now dead, um, to bring these weapons in themselves. You can imagine the sort of the coup it was. Now, obviously, the excellent shipment uh, was intercepted and they lost all. They were about to scuttle it, but it was captured, and so they lost all that weaponry. But they still had an incredible amount. And another detail which I just remember the time was just incredible about how Tom Murphy um, wanted to give the Libyans a gift of an Alsatian. So this dog is there's a arranged for this dog to be bought in Germany or something and shipped over to Libya, and all the documents is signed. And um, he also gave them a double bed and 2 cans of olive oil. As so I don't know how Tom Murphy came up with those as gifts, but those were the gifts to the Libyans. So that Libyan connection was incredibly important. And also for me, just in the research for this that was fascinating is again like South Armagh's at the heart of it, you know. So it's not it is this rural area and they are doing their own thing, but at the same time, they're spreading their tentacles out throughout the IRA. They're very important within the IRA and sort of internationally. And I'm sure we'll sort of come onto it, but in the United States as well. But yeah, to me, it's sort of incredible that Murphy personally had trained in Libya. And again, there's a funny thing about from Adrian Hopkins, who was again I think died pretty recently, but he was the I think the skipper of some of these shipments and got. I mean, at one point he got, and this is the mid '80s, got £500,000, for his work. So, I mean, I think he was doing it for financial reasons rather than ideological. Um, but he was party to this, some of the discussions between Tom Murphy and Kevin McKenna and the Libyans, and he just remarked um, that Murphy and McKenna had no idea about world geography, which was kind of funny. Can you imagine these farmers in South Armagh who know every sort of blade of grass in their locality? But we're starting to discuss the route from North Africa to Ireland. They're maybe not so comfortable with that.
It is almost like I know we're talking about like weapons of death and weapons of war, but like it is almost funny to think of like a South Armagh farmer like walking around Tripoli getting like sunburnt and like I don't know, there's almost there's almost like a comedic kind of element to it. To
Yeah,
go to some of the actual shipments. So at least of Slab's one. It's believed that there was like four successful anyway. The first being August '85, the Casamara, that was landed on the Wicklow beach, excuse me, Cloggestrand. Like we said, yeah, geez, in fairness to Slab and Kevin McKenna, they like literally got their hands dirty, down there on the ground bringing it in. That particular shipment had 300 boxes of weaponry, including AK-47s, Taurus automatic pistols from Brazil, seven Soviet-made RPG-7s, three Russian DSHK heavy
Extras,
machine
yeah.
guns, which would be used to devastating effect. The second shipment was in the same year, 85. It was October. Again, Cloggestrand and Wicklow became like a favorite place. There was another in April 86. Slab, like you say, he flew to Greece to arrange this one. That had 14 tons of cargo, including two Sam 7s. We'll get to the whole anti-helicopter kind of war later on. And then the fourth successful one was the Villa, and I believe like weapon. I think Semtex. I think it's believed that like from 86 or 87 onwards, almost like literally almost every single IRA bomb, landmine, explosive,
Yeah,
whatever had Semtex from these shipments.
yeah.
There was going to be the one that you mentioned. They all kind of almost scuttled was going to be their biggest. The ship was called the
Excellent.
Exxon. Yeah, I know how to pronounce it. Jesus Christ, that one took apparently took 50 Libyan soldiers like 2 nights to load 130 tons of weaponry onto a ship in Tripoli. We're talking 2 tons of Semtex, 1,000 AK-47s, 1,000 mortars, 600 F1 grenades, 120 RPG sevens, 20 Sam sevens, 10 DSHK machine guns again, 2,000 electric detonators, nearly 5,000 fuses, and over 1 million rounds of ammo. So that would have been Jesus Christ if they managed to land and use all that, it would have been incredible. Like, going on to the another really fascinating aspect of the whole thing was from America. There's a chapter in the book I believe called Made in America, and there was a gentleman named was it Richard Johnson?
Yeah, Richard Clark Johnson. Yeah,
Okay, yeah, you might tell us about him. Incredibly intelligent and not. I found it so fascinating because he's someone like you really wouldn't kind of think some American guy who worked on like I don't know if he worked for NASA or something, but it was like
well, so yeah, he worked on the Voyager and space shuttle programs. He was in, so I think he was about mid-30s at the time. But he'd been educated, I think, Catholic University, here in or close to me in DC. He worked for Northrop, which is now Northrop Grumman, and so like a boffin, but an incredibly intelligent guy. Um, single, living alone, goes to see his parents regularly, just like a boring, humdrum life. I mean, he was in prison because he eventually got 10 years, and he was in prison when I was writing Bandit Country. I would absolutely love to have spoken to him, but no, I don't think an Irish American background. I might be wrong. But there's nothing that would mark him out as basically the brains behind, incredibly sophisticated, improvised devices to try and bring down helicopters in South Armagh. But 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 basically, he, you know, obviously the British and the FBI are working very, very closely. So it's this kind of network. This guy called Eamon Maguire, who was, a long-standing IRA guy who was involved in, technology and I guess weapons research. And he was in contact with Richard Johnson. There's a guy called Martin Quigley who was studying at
Dundalk.
uh, from Dundalk, who's studying at Ohio University in Pennsylvania. Um, he was involved. Very clever sort of people who um, are just trying to work out um, how to bring down um, helicopters and so Johnson, I think, had worked with the IRA before, and then a message comes through, and they're all using different names. So I think Eamon Maguire called himself Ed, and Johnson called himself Tom. So they're trying to speak in these codes, not super sophisticated, um, on the phone. But basically Johnson is kind of reactivated. It's like we need your help again. He says, yeah, sure, whatever you need. And so um, basically, Quigley's a younger guy, IRA volunteer, very clever, and the IRA would kind of send people to college basically to study, and I think he was one of those, and so his job was to um, work on devices which would get a missile sort of close to a helicopter, and Johnson was the bit how to detonate uh, the missile when it gets really close, and so he used I think it was like the weather radio alert system. So it was a thing for like mariners and mountaineers to read the weather. I mean, obviously, this is what uh, like 30, 40 years ago. So technology a lot less sophisticated. Um, and like I mean, I think he said at one point on a sort of intercepted telephone call, we'd be nowhere without Radio Shack. So he was the guy who was using like those devices that I mean we have ways now, but that would detect police radars. So they pick up police radar. So you can buy these things off the counter from Radio Shack and use them in devices to you know detonate a missile next to a helicopter. And so um, and as time went on, more people were involved. There was another student at Lehigh University that was involved. People being flown over from Ireland to the US, but the FBI's monitoring it. So um, eventually they all get arrested, and there's an incredible. I feel like it's like a movie scene, really. But again, I managed to get it from these court documents. I think it was Johnson and Quigley were meeting, I think, in Pennsylvania, and they did a code over, not a great code really, but it was like um, 12, 14, 37, something, and it was basically we're going to meet at noon 12, on the 13th at Route 37, and that's where on Johnson's normal route to work across Route 37. So the FBI cracked the code, and they arranged to meet at this picnic spot. And so what the FBI did was they got they put out the word or whatever, and they got all these FBI families and it was a Memorial Day weekend, to occupy every single picnic bench at this place, apart from two. And then they put bugs on the other two who were left open, thinking that, you know, Johnson and Quigley were going to choose one of those two. But then the problem was it started raining. And so when Quigley and Johnson arrived, they go, oh, let's go to the McDonald's. And so I can imagine the FBI guys who are sitting in a van are probably like, oh, shit. Then the McDonald's is full. So they come back out and they do sit at one of the picnic benches. And so these two guys are, you know, talking about this technology to bring down helicopters in South Armagh, and they're just surrounded by FBI families, all just pretending to have a picnic. Um, and then eventually there's kind of a screw up because the FBI is putting a bug into Johnson's car at his workplace, and he walked through this like glass walkway and saw these guys in his car. And so and they tried to pretend, they were fitting a car radio and it was the wrong vehicle and stuff. And but obviously Johnson realized, I think they'd been, they had suspected they were under surveillance, and that confirmed it. So they were arrested, and the whole thing was rolled up, and Johnson went to jail. I think think Maguire fled the country, but was eventually arrested and convicted, and Quigley was convicted as well.
It was very interesting that that system he was trying to work. He was trying to work on sending up a rocket of some kind, and then it would detect when it was within like 20 or 25 feet of a helicopter and blow. Yeah, it would make quite a difference. Apparently, he is pardon the pun, but floated the idea of attaching grenades to like a string on a balloon, and it would go up
Yeah,
and get caught in the blades of the chopper and bring it down.
yeah.
Okay,
I
yeah,
guess it's a bit like, I mean, Johnson was one of those guys, like, DARPA here, I forget what it stands for, the Pentagon's like research organization, where it's just like highly intelligent, educated boffins who are just like working out, ingenious ways of like killing people or stopping people being killed. So, the IRA was kind of doing that stuff as well.
yeah. Let me get on to the actual like cases of trying to take out helicopters. It was like I said before, I love kind of contrasting it with the War of Independence, given that so much of it is the same type of warfare, just with much upgraded weaponry. The helicopter thing is a completely new aspect. There was nothing like that for the War of Independence. So yeah, this is like a completely new dimension to it. Okay, so according to the army in South Armagh, there was some 23 attacks on helicopters, bringing down three, but then there was like four if you count one of them where they kind of had to land. That was the one in 91 caught by a film crew actually, funny enough. Okay, so the first attack anyway, it didn't bring him down or anything. Was actually in September 74, so it was when they actually were still using the roads. This was four gunmen. They just kind of landed some bullets on it. In 76, April 15th, the same day as Peter Cleary's death, they actually came pretty close. They managed to bounce an RPG round off the belly of a Wessex in Crossmaglen, but obviously didn't bring it down. And the first case of bringing one down was a Gazelle in 78. I believe is the only one that actually resulted in a death, that first one. It was 78. There was another brought down in 88, which was the first time it's believed those DSHK machine guns were used. These, just for context, these I think would require about two or three lads to carry them.
Oh,
They
it's massive. I've actually fired one. Um, they're like, yeah, 50 Dushkas, they're known as 50 caliber machine guns. They're incredible. Like it's an incredible like boom, with these massive rounds. But they're serious pieces of equipment, and yeah, moving them around is very difficult.
In turn, we spoke a bit earlier about this constant like kind of one-upping of like adjustments and counter adjustments and readjustments. You said in the book since 1989, machine guns have been mounted on all helicopters flying in South Armagh, and pilots were instructed to only fly in pairs, which was later upgraded to threes as the threat increased. Each helicopter would have to have two pilots in case one was hit by gunfire, and they started arming the pilots with pistols in case they got shot down, and then faced the very terrifying the terrifying possibility of either getting hunted down and killed or possibly taken hostage. It'd be very, very scary.
Yeah.
In 1990, in February, there was an attempted ambush on three helicopters, which resulted in three of the 20 plus man IRA team being captured, but they were actually the the I'm not sure if it was the guards or the army who did capture them, but they were surrounded by a crowd, which kind of turned into a mob and forced them to release them. In February 91, there was one forced to crash in a field. This was caught, like I said, by an RT film crew. They were just filming kind of something else in Crossmaglen, and they kind of turned around, and there was this incredibly intense, I guess not a gun battle, but shooting in broad daylight from behind the health center in Crossmaglen. August 91. This didn't bring it down, but there was a Mark 12 mortar attack on helicopters unloading troops in Newton Hamilton, but I think it landed. The helicopter was up by the time it landed. Not South Armagh, but just on the anti-helicopter thing in March '92. There was an attempt by the Fermanagh Brigade. Yeah, mid-March, the Fermanagh Brigade. They fired about 1,000 machine gun rounds at two different lynxes from across the border. Sorry, from near the border, excuse me, in Fermanagh. There was another one, not brought down, but an attempt on it. This was June '93. It was a Puma helicopter, and it was shot out with an improvised mortar from the back of a bread van, and the mortar exploded. After the heli had taken out. I could be wrong. I have to go back and check. I think I interviewed a soldier who was in that particular helicopter, but they were fine. Um, Another attempted one in '93 resulted in what's believed to be the most intense gun battle of the whole conflict, which was the Battle of Newry Road. This was when, let me have a look. Yeah, it's September 23rd, about 2 p.m. Members of IRA's South Armagh Brigade deployed 5 armed trucks in different positions around Crossmaglen Barracks. They were targeting RAF Puma helicopters from the operating in the Crossmaglen helipad. This basically turned into like a running gun battle. Where was it? Yeah, the helicopters fired 200 rounds of them, and the IRA report put the number of rounds spent in the whole engagement in the thousands. The action lasted 10 to 30 minutes and was assessed by the British Army to be the most intense gun battle South Armagh. Yeah, and no casualties on either side. And finally, just to wrap up, I think what you call the most successful attack on helicopters in the book, that was in March '94, and it was a mortar attack on a Lynx, and I believe they had it connected to the electricity system, so the lights went
Yeah,
out, and then this fired, and they actually managed to like wound a helicopter with a mortar.
yeah. And there was another one. So, and I think I missed this in Bandit Country actually. There was another one in 1978. There was a Lieutenant Colonel Gordon Lloyd who he was in the Royal Green Jackets, and I think that was a Gazelle, and I think they hit it, and then it subsequently crashed, and he was killed. And so it's kind of arguable, was that the IRA killing somebody or whatever, um, but I've had people say to me, well, actually, the IRA did kill somebody from a helicopter because all those you mentioned, I think there were no deaths, even though it's miraculous. There was a Grenadier Guards major who was hit twice in the leg. Some of these helicopters took like 15 rounds and stuff, and they didn't, you know, and they didn't sort of crash. So it was sort of fortuitous. But I think actually, arguably they did kill a lieutenant colonel in '78, and so I guess on the IRA side, you know, they'd they'd kind of counter the notion that they didn't manage to kill anybody in a helicopter.
Sure. What one thing that they never managed to get this campaign kind of off the ground, but they were dying to employ the use of Sam Sevens, which they did get into the country. And I read in your book that once the British Army kind of had established that the IRA had him, they fitted their helicopters with like infrared jammers to to
Yeah,
prevent to prevent the thing catching onto it. That would have
yeah,
been
and also stingers. I mean, they tried very hard to buy stingers in Florida, and it was an FBI, customs um, sting, but they actually, there were IRA men who actually had the stingers sort of in their hands, but unfortunately for them, it was a sting operation. You know, the stinger sting, and it was actually U.S. government personnel who'd been posing as arm dealers. So they nearly got their hands on stingers as well, and they certainly wanted them.
I'm sorry, I didn't mention for anyone who doesn't know. SAM 7 stands for surface to air missiles. and
yeah,
they were used. I think they were used very effectively against the Soviets by in Afghanistan, right? They were able to bring down
yeah.
quite.
And the Stinger, they probably used that Sam 7 as well, but certainly the Stingers, credited with basically, turning the war between the Mujahideen and the Soviets in the 80s, against the Soviets, and thereby contributing to the end of the Cold War. So, pretty big deal.
The 90s, I guess the kind of mid 90s, it can be kind of defined as we've talked about it a bit before, but like the sniper at work,
Yeah,
the sniper at work kind of era. Like we mentioned, there have been sniper kills sporadically through the decades, but the effectiveness of the Barrett rifle was unmatched, and the time they were able to employ it, they did some devastating damage. Am I correct in saying it's believed that it came from America and it was pieced together, right?
well, so there was one. So the Barrett Light 50 is the weapon that's best known. So there's one of those that was actually intercepted, I think, in Dublin, and was so it's flown in parts, and then I guess the authorities in Dublin intercepted it and pieced it together. The and I think there were Barrett Light, at least one Barrett Light 50 did get into Ireland and was used. But the weapon used in the 90s from 93 90 these sniper attacks, I think there were 24 of them from 90 I think 90 in the 90s anyway. Get when
I
Forget
think it
exactly
started
when
in
they start.
92. Started in 92.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that sounds right. That sounds right. And they went through to 97 because um Lance Bombardier, Stephen Restorick, he was killed in 97 and he was killed by Barrett. So they were Barrett 90s. So two of them was two of them were bought and two of them were smuggled in. And then now out of those 24 attacks, not all of them were from the Barrett 90. Some of them were 7.62 millimeter um, weapons rather than 50 caliber weapons, which the Barrett 90 is. So the Barrett 90 is bolt action, um, which makes it perfect because for single shot sniping, because also it doesn't eject a round, so you're not going to leave like a shell casing that can be traced, and it ejects less like forensic like material, like kind of dust that's going to stick on your hands and clothes and stuff. And so um, uh, at least one of them was used. Don't know whether the other one was used, but that was captured. I think I said 97. I think it might have actually been at 98. I'd have to check. But I think April 98, the IRA sniper team was was captured, and then the Barrett 90 was found in this concealed compartment at the bottom of a cattle truck. So they were getting in position to do a sniper attack, and so Bernard McGinn, Mihal Caraher, who was the sniper, um, Seamus McArdle, who had also been involved in the uh, the Canary Wharf bomb in February 96, where I was actually, well, it's more correct to call it the South Key bomb or the Docklands bomb, but it was close to Canary Wharf. I was actually in Canary Wharf when that bomb went off, and it was a pretty big one. That was the end of the first IRA ceasefire. So that was a South Armagh operation, and one of the sniper team, Ricardo, was involved in that. Probably other people connected with the sniper team were connected to that
That
bomb
was
too. And
sorry to cut in. It was 97 when they were caught. It was April 97.
oh, okay, right. Okay, that makes sense actually because yes, because the ceasefire was in July 97, the second ceasefire, and then the Good Friday Agreement was April 98. Yeah, that's right.
That,
Um,
that fella Restorick was, I believe, the last soldier killed.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, and that was Mihal Kara, and that was the Barrett 90. So yeah, so it was incredibly effective. Um, not through the number of people killed necessarily. I think there were nine killed, and then one. a constable called Ronnie Galway, who I've interviewed and actually saw a couple of years ago. Um, he he um, he was wounded, so I think it hit his maglite, his like torch, and then probably broke the ram probably broke up and he was hit in the thigh. I mean, incredibly fortunate to survive being hit by a 50 caliber round. That was outside Forkhill base, and again, Mihal Kara, who was like lying prone on top of a dog kennel, and Karaha was convicted in part because of a footprint that he left on the dog kennel. But most of the attacks were actually from the back of an estate car. So again, clever and
16,
and
16 out of 24, yeah.
right. And so and it goes back to I think there was an incident in Crossmaglen Square in I think 1978. And it was Grenadier Guards, and there was an ambush where the IRA fired a weapon from the back of some kind of truck, which I think had it was loaded with like cardboard boxes, and they killed I think three guardsmen um, from the back of the vehicle. And obviously, it's kind of perfect because you've got a mobile firing platform, and then you can just speed off. And then by the time the security forces work out what's going on, you're gone. And so, and then also, I think in that 1978 attack, and certainly in the sniper attacks, they um, they built this like steel plate, which would be put in the back of the vehicle, and so there'd be like a little kind of hole cut in it, um, and then so the sniper can lie down, and the barrel of the weapon points through the hole in this steel plate. So obviously, if fire is returned, um, you're almost certainly not going to get hit because it's going to bounce off this steel plate. So it's pretty sophisticated operation. You had the SAS out on the ground. Um, you had helicopters. I mean, there was a lot of resources were put into apprehending these snipers. Now, I believe there were two sniper teams. There was one um, around more around Drum and T, and there was one more around Collyhanna. This was the Collyhanna team. I'm sure they swapped people around, but I think there was more than one sniper. But Mihal Carroll was certainly the principal sniper for one of the teams. And whether it was an informant, I mean, I'm told that it was, whether it was surveillance, uh, whether it was some kind of combination, I don't know, but they were apprehended uh, by the SAS at this farmhouse off the Creggenduff Road. Um, and I was in court for the sniper trial throughout the whole thing. And so um, the SAS troopers testified behind a screen so the defendants could see them, but the people in the public gallery, including me, couldn't see them. But basically, there were, I think, well, there were more than four. I think there were six or seven arrests. I think there were four convicted, including Mihal Karaha. Burnham McGinn was like punched in the face. He had a kind of altercation with one of the SAS. I mean, obviously everybody's running for it. And then McGinn broke under interrogation and kind of, spilled the beans. But and then he recanted. He's since died. I think he died of cancer. I'm surprised the IRA kind of let him back, but he went and served his sentence in the maze with the IRA prisoners. But they were all released under the Good Friday Agreement. And in fact, when they were convicted, the guys, as the other one was Martin Mines. So the four of them were all like, punching the air and Chucky Allah, and we'll be see you in 18 months because they knew there was a sort of, you know, peace agreement sort of on the horizon. But yeah, it was incredibly effective, I think, psychologically, because the British Army couldn't really operate. It was very, very hard to operate. Soldiers were sort of terrified. There were instances of them not actually going out on patrol and falsifying their records because they're just like, we just don't want to go out and risk that. So again, like great pop sniper at work signs, great sort of propaganda value. And so it was kind of another sort of phase of the conflict down there, and there were sniper attacks elsewhere and 50 caliber um, uh, attacks, but it was for this sniper at work and one shot Paddy. He was called by the Brits. It was very much a South Armagh thing, and it's kind of part of, I guess, IRA legend now.
Sure. I forgot to mention earlier, on talking about those Sam Sevens, just because I forgot earlier, I think the only recorded incident of one of them being fired was in 81 in Fermanagh and didn't hit its target. I just wanted to mention that.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay,
Back to the back to the sniper thing, there was okay, yeah. So a Major M who you spoke to for your book, he was source for a lot of information. Um he said something about their MO. It was very interesting. He said when driving a sniper through South Armagh, the IRA protected it with scout cars. Whenever they were moving anything, they push a vehicle in front to catch checkpoints. They'll also have a couple of cars out on parallel routes, so they can switch routes. The roads in South Armagh tend to run parallel from northwest to southeast at a 45-degree angle. So if you were running a couple of vehicles up the middle road and a couple up the side roads, and the vehicle in the lead in the middle runs into a checkpoint, for example, you can push the vehicle that's following with a sniper team across into one of the side roads. And you've got a car waiting for them to take over the job. Uh, oh yeah, okay. So the British said that the catching of them was down, or at least to some degree, to the fact that with the ceasefires, which ironically the South Armagh crowd would have been very wary of and very skeptical of, this actually allowed them to kind of like look at all their data, and instead of just being on the response, it allowed them to kind of find patterns and stuff,
yeah,
and possibly help them um, with that. Yeah, okay. So a study of distributions from the attack, I'm quoting from the book, showed that they fell into two distinct zones around Colleyhanna and Drummond. Like you said, at first we believed it was one unit, one weapon, one trigger man. It developed into at least two. It was a process of elimination, working out who was involved, and eventually we decided there had to be more than one team operating. The Drummond sniper tended to use up to 20 volunteers as a dicking screen. You'd see dickers coming out during the day of an attack, although volunteers detailed to take part might not even know whether it was for a bomb, a sniper, smuggling operation. Their jobs could range from watching the front gates of a barracks to sitting in vehicles at key junctions. They could end up holding down the area for up to 5 miles. Cowher, McGinn, McArdle, and Martin Stove mines, who formed the nucleus of the Colleyhanna team, had a modus operandi based on predicting when patrols would be using the route in and out of Crossmaglen. This required fewer dickers. Crossmaglen was like a shooting gallery with most of the snipes coming straight down one of the six roads that leads into the square. In terms of the army's response, they at one stage got like armor plates for their guys. They weighed like 32 pounds, so they're quite heavy, too heavy for foot patrol, and could only kind of be worn for 2 hours, even if you were just at a checkpoint. Um, yeah, it's kind of not much not much you can do about it. It added. You mentioned this before, but yeah, it added like an extra dimension to kind of the sort of spinning plates that they had the army had to balance. Like they might have been like, for example, they were concerned about mortar attacks, and what you do to nullify them is you put troops on the ground to actually find the base of mortar fire. But when you do that, you're just giving targets to a sniper, which you can mitigate by using helicopters. But then, of course, you're offering them the biggest scalp of all, which would be downing a helicopter. So it just added like it just added extra difficulty to the whole.
yeah. You can just imagine on both sides the sort of brain power that goes into all this as well. Just thinking, like, what are they going to do? How are they going to respond? How can we respond? Are they bluffing? Is this a trap? Because the British Army will put out patrols which were designed to lure a sniper team. And so, but of course, if the sniper team outwitted them, they could actually kill somebody, you know. And sometimes there'd be SAS troopers who would be out there in the uniform of like the Welsh Guards or whatever the regiment was. So there's a lot of uh, you know mind games kind of going on with all of this.
Again, to quote from Major M, source from a book, he actually had kind of like an admiring sort of take on the snipers. He said the sniper tactic was incredibly sorry was clever, and the attacks were carried out beautifully. It was face-to-face contact with a superior force, all of whom were armed. It was not like parking a mortar base plate and pissing off. It was actually pointing a weapon at a man who's also got one and who's got 15 mates around him and pulling the trigger and then getting away. The snipes started from around 600 yards and came down to less than 200 yards. That's getting really close, close enough for us to be using weapons like light machine guns effectively. That's unbelievably ballsy, and to work effectively at that sort of range takes a lot of guts to control your breathing and your heart in those sort of circumstances. It's difficult enough, but when you know that you're taking on the sort of odds, it's even harder. And it's not easy getting away in a countryside when there's so many helicopters in the air. I've got a lot of respect for them. It wasn't cowardly in the slightest.
Yeah, so I remember having that conversation um, with that guy, and yeah, I guess the conversation was partly about. So there's this thing with politicians, and it's understandable um, that they'll always say, "Oh, these attacks are cowardly," or "These are just thugs and criminals," and I understand why politicians say that, and you know, and I think for the families of people who've been killed, they have pretty strong feelings about this. And actually, that particular passage you read, I remember having back and forth with Rita Restorik, who was the mother of Stephen Restorik, and she was kind of upset about it, and I just kind of tried to explain it to her that you know these are sort of, I guess, if you like, military professionals talking about it on that sort of level. Again, it's a similar thing. You might be talking about 9/11. You know, obviously they killed 3,000 people, and um, that's terrible. And Bin Laden and Al Qaeda are savages and you know terrible people and everything. But at the same time, if you look at the 9/11 operation, it was incredible to be able to pull that off, where you got 19 hijackers on 4 planes, and you managed to um, fly two of them into the World Trade Center and one of them into the Pentagon, in like the heart of American like commercial power, the most important city in the world, in New York, and you know the military nerve center in Washington, D.C. So it doesn't mean you approve of it, but you've got to sort of respect your enemy, because if you just think they're all like stupid knuckle draggers, then that's not gonna work out so well. Um, and so the other thing kind of reminded me of, it's like Tom Cockey, who was the guy who was very badly burned in the Narrow Water massacre. Um, he also kind of gave them the due, and it's in the book where he sort of said, it was pretty, I kind of hate them, but it was a pretty clever operation. Um, and so I remember Tom Cockey, who was the paratrooper who was very badly burned in the Narrow Water attack in 1979. And he was basically saying, like, obviously I hate them. They killed my friends and they, changed my life. But, I've got to give them their due. It was a pretty clever operation. But I do remember him also saying, but, they just had to press buttons. And so this comment from Major M, um, he, he was saying it wasn't just pushing buttons with the sniper attacks, so they were getting pretty close. So the kind of legend is, obviously the range of a 50 caliber rifle is more than a mile, and so there are lots of legends about snipers and the longest kill and all the rest of it. So these, um, I mean, he said that it's generally no further out than 600 meters yards. Um, so not in some ways not that difficult a shot. If you have a weapon like that, and sometimes they're as close as 200 meters. But obviously, if you're getting in that close, there's considerable risk to you from small arms fire in return, and so I guess I mean, I guess part of the theme, one of the themes of the book is that whatever you think about the IRA, cause and what they did and how many people were killed and whether it was worth it and all the rest of it. Um, but militarily, the South Armagh Brigade was, militarily very sophisticated, and the British Army, including the SAS, felt that they were kind of worthy adversaries.
Okay, we'll wrap up soon enough. I appreciate all the time we spent. I just wanted to mention we talked about there was like a counter ambush. It was Glasdrumann. It was the scrapyard that we referred to earlier. There was another similar enough incident like this where close observation soldiers had been put
Yeah,
in. Had been put in. This was May 1990. I'm quoting for the book. The army had mounted Operation Conservation, a elaborate plan to lure the IRA into attacking light infantry. Soldiers dug in around Silver Bridge and Collyhanna. Some 16 COP teams were inserted in a ring around the light infantry positions with orders to ambush any IRA team that attempted an attack. But the IRA had pinpointed several of the covert positions and established that a four-man Scots Guard near Collyhanna was vulnerable. The Scots Guard team had been inserted deep into a large area of gorse at 3 a.m. on May 3rd. At 2 a.m. on May 6th, an IRA unit some 400 yards away raked the position with gunfire from two GPMGs and a Heckler& Koch G3 rifle. There was a lance sergeant hit in the head and killed during the fierce 90-second firefight, which saw the IRA expending 188 rounds and Scots Guard 128. It was later ascertained that two of the IRA men positioned themselves in a small gully next to a derelict house on a downward slope of a hill. Boulders had been used to build firing ports through which the GPMGs had been pointed. The green military face veils had concealed the gun barrels. So yeah, it was okay, and then there was a quote then. It was another classic South Armagh rural contact, audacious, aggressive, and accurate, reported a senior army officer who concluded that a well-trained IRA gun team was operating Collyhanna, by this time considered to be the most dangerous part of Northern Ireland.
yeah, yeah. I mean, just it just sort of speaks to obviously there are all these labels, like we mentioned, cowards and stuff, and terrorists and thugs, and there are all these labels that are applied. Um, but you know, that's like it's like two armies, fighting each other and trying to outwit each other, really.
So the rural lads generally, and especially the South Armagh boys, were kind of known as being a lot more hardline, very resistant to the peace process, and even the ballot and Armagh like kind of
Yeah.
there was a quote there from someone saying that Slab at a meeting, someone was half taking the piss and said, "Oh, how are we going to win the war there?" And he said, "Oh, we'll bomb them to the negotiating table and then booby trap the table." So yeah, their mentality was one of kind of complete militarism and
And
not.
so yeah, that's right. And so the end of that, the last bit of that anecdote, which I thought was funny as well, was one of the Sinn Féin guys or one of the Belfast guys said, "Oh, and what about the Sinn Féin delegation?" And then Paul Murphy says, "Ah, we in South Armagh never tell anyone where we put our booby traps." So it's all like banter and joking, but it does speak to, you know, um, there wasn't even even in the mid 90s, there wasn't much Sinn Féin around in South Armagh. It was IRA, and obviously it's all part of the same thing. It's all part of the Republican movement, and there's a lot of people who had were dual-hatted, so to speak. But I remember Jim McAllister, who's now dead, was a Sinn Féin councillor and former IRA man, um, uh, who I got to know very well, and he was old school. He saw Sinn Féin as basically just the kind of the PR, the PR for the IRA, and he was a strongly pro IRA. He fell out with them after with the Adams and Co. after the Good Friday Agreement because he believed in a united Ireland by all means necessary, and I felt like he was a pretty effective spokesman for South Armagh Republican movement, and he was all about the IRA, and I think that was you know, you know, Tom Murphy's never been active in Sinn Féin either.
Okay, so the two big bombings in England that were kind of planned and executed from South Armagh, they were very much like an anti-peace process kind of actions. It was them going out kicking basically, going out not quietly at all. You actually started the book. I can't remember which of those bombs, but you started the
That
book.
was the South Key bomb being mixed in the cattle shed. Yeah,
In fact, and yeah, Carragher himself was there. Loads of the main players.
yeah. McCardle, Frank McCabe, um, the surgeon, uh, and other people I can't name, but they were yeah. But it was sort of incredible, like this nucleus, same guys.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, talk to us a little bit about I guess you call it like the fizzling out of the IRA in South America. A lot of them then went on to kind of form and join like the so-called real IRA, and then and later I'm not even sure who went where, but there was
Yeah,
later then new IRA continuity IRA. Yeah, can you talk to us a little bit about this to wrap up?
yeah. Well, so I reported on the Omagh bomb. I was there. In fact, when it went off, I was in the library in Dundalk, and I remember getting a call as I kind of got into my car in Dundalk. There was a massive bomb in Omagh. It was like 29 people killed. Um, and some of the, well, obviously Mickey McKevitt, who's now dead, was former Provisional IRA quartermaster, um, married to Bernadette Sands. Um, and he was a Dundalk guy, but really when you say South Armagh, it's South Armagh and North Louth, so it's kind of so he was certainly um like a comrade of Tom Murphy's, and obviously he went over to lead the real IRA and he and other South Armagh and North Louth guys were behind that the Omagh bomb. So, but but in terms of like the Manchester bomb or the South Key bomb, they were IRA operations. They weren't factional. I mean, the seven members of the Army Council who, certainly included Martin McGuinness and, Jerry Adams and other people, senior Sinn Féin people, they authorized it every bit as much as Tom Murphy did. Now, I'm sure, Tom Murphy was probably more happy with the South Key bomb than he was with either either of the ceasefires. But the movement, I think, and I haven't followed it closely for the last 25 years, but just from afar. But I think the movement um, has remained incredibly united, and surprisingly, I mean, if you'd asked me in 1999, what I would have thought this is sort of not over because I couldn't, and there are quotes in there from the book like by people like Pat Thompson, who I think was very influential in the movement, like former prisoner, um, saying, you know, decommissioning it's never going to happen. And so obviously it did happen in some form. I rather doubt that, for instance, the other Barrett 90 sniper rifle was part of that decommissioning process. It's probably somewhere in Ireland. And, I think there's stuff there. And I think Sinn Féin has said that the IRA doesn't exist anymore. I don't think that's true. I think, the structure is there, the people are there, the weapons are there. And I think just like the border campaign, it was sort of over then, but for whatever 15 years, I I, I think it's not impossible that um, it could sort of reignite and have another phase. But having said all that, I mean, if you look at the surgeon, who's obviously a protege uh, of Tom Murphy, and a sort of accomplished, dedicated IRA man, but he um, has been involved in Sinn Féin, seems to be tight with the Sinn Féin leadership, and so the South Armagh brigade as a whole has stayed loyal to the Republican movement, with the exception of a relatively small slice who've gone to the real IRA, and they probably still. I don't. I mean, you know, there have been reports of feuds. There was a killing a few years ago in Kalihana. So there certainly is tension. Um, but at the same time, a lot of these people are from the same families and probably still kind of, you know, do business together, probably non-IRA business. So it's sort of surprised me in some ways how um, uh, South Armagh has stayed with the broader Republican movement and more didn't go with McKevitt. But obviously, you know, um, the Omagh bomb, which was kind of a terrible mistake, if you like. I mean, they didn't mean to kill 29 people. They had somebody who was not up to the job on the warnings, and so the police, it doesn't excuse killing that number of people because obviously every time you set off a bomb, that can happen. But the police ended up hurting the people right around the car, instead of the other way because the war it was lost in translation in the warnings. But I think that really put um, the real IRA and McKevitt on the defensive. And it's like we could you could debate it for another couple of hours of there's Jerry Adams and Martin McGuinness and Danny Morrison and the Belfast sort of leadership, Bobby Story, who's now dead. Um, do they believe in um, uh, do they still believe in a united Ireland? Do they? I mean, I believe broadly speaking, these are sort of tactical differences. How to get to the same um, how to get to the same end state, which is a united Ireland. I don't believe that it's way too simplistic to say, oh, Jerry Adams believes in peace and Tom Murphy belongs in war. I think it's just different means to the same ultimate goal. But yeah, it is fascinating to me that South Armagh has remained loyal to the largely Belfast leadership.
That 96 bomb, the fact we spoke earlier about the fact that they're kind of wary to use fellas outside of their area and that kind of thing. That bomb, that car bomb was I believe fully made, packed into the car and everything, and then inside the and
Yeah,
then right, yeah.
and the driver was Seamus McArdle, who's a South Armagh guy. That's part of their sort of security, because if you have a Belfast guy who's going to drive pick up the bomb and cross the Irish Sea and drive it through England, then that's just another um, element of the operation that can be compromised. So why not just use a South Armagh guy who actually mixed the bomb in the cattle shed to do the driving as well, like keep it in a tight sort of circle.
Mm. Thank you so much now for everything you share, all the time you spend. Thank you for writing the book. It is absolutely brilliant, classic. If anyone hasn't read it, it's a must read on the subject. Would you ever think of turning your attention? Obviously you wrote it back then when it kind of had just happened and was happening. Would you ever think of turning your attention again to Northern Ireland or the Troubles, producing some other book on it?
Possibly. I mean, in some ways, I feel like I've left it behind, and I'm very proud of Bandit Country. Um, and recently, so I've done a couple of books since then. I did one, Dead Men Risen, about the Welsh Guards in Afghanistan. I did one, First Casualty, about the CIA in Afghanistan. I'm working on another book which is about the CIA, and so I'm very much sort of America based these days. I've been a citizen since 2009, so um, I have no plans to, but I'm always interested in um, great stories, and just talking for a couple of hours today, you know, um, I just remember what an incredible time I had there, how exciting it was, how fascinating it was, and I just love putting together, you know, interviews from both sides, documentaries, documents and stuff, and putting it all together. And so yeah, if the right story came along, then I'd definitely consider it.
Oh, cool. I say this for almost all the authors who who I've interviewed who've written books on the subject, but this would make a great maybe not a film. I actually think it would make a great like 9 part kind of one season whatever HBO or Netflix thing. Nine like 8 or 9 episodes would give it the kind
Yeah.
of time and need and stuff. Would you I'm sure it's up to the publisher and stuff. But would you would you like to see us get taken to the screens?
Oh yeah, I mean there've been a couple of times, it's like Hollywood type stuff, these things are dangled in front of you and you kind of get all excited and then nothing comes of it. Um, but yeah, I very much agree because there's a lot of stuff now about the 80s and 90s on streaming platforms that's sort of history, like the Cold War and stuff, and so this is history now, and there was a strong historical element even when I wrote it, but but yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could do something where you had you could do it sort of factual, but you have something fictional with a family going all the way through, and actually the way you framed it today with the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, there are so many changes and twists and turns, and there's some incredible characters. We think of the stuff in the US. I mean, I was reading some of it earlier about the FBI, in sort of Fort Lauderdale, meeting with IRA men from South Armagh in Big Daddy's restaurant, and then it's too noisy because Leonard Skinner is playing in the background, so they go to a Denny's, and it's just sort of, you know, obviously this is a dark subject in many ways, but there's a lot of, you know, hilarious things. Or the IRA volunteer who's driving the lorry with the mortise on the back, who puts on a Ronald Reagan mask, like just as he's driving, you know, like, why did he choose a Ronald Reagan mask? I don't know. So there's like yeah, I think there's a real richness and a human side to this that I think will be yeah, it would be great for a streaming series. But I would say that, wouldn't I?
Sure. No, but objectively speaking, and I mean, obviously, I'm very careful not to kind of trivialize it or view parts of this conflict as like a cool action movie. But given that
No.
there was so much kind of militarism with the South Armagh, like there's so many. When I was reading the book, there was like so many scenes, like the Battle of Newry Road, that would just make an amazing fucking scene to
Yeah,
have like
exactly.
3 or 5 trucks with light machine gun taking on helicopter. There's plenty that would make for some really
Yeah.
good action.
But at the same time, there's like the military aspect, but there's also um, like the intellectual side of it, which again, I think's come out in this conversation, which is fascinating, the historical element to it, but also the characters. So you have all those things because I'm a big, I've written a lot of stuff about war and everything. Um, and, but I don't like this kind of just bang, bang, people call it war porn sometimes, where it's just guys like shooting each other and blood and guts, and because that's sort of meaningless in a way if you can't connect it to the bigger picture. And uh so yeah, I'm always very interested in that's part of it and stuff, the reality of the awful reality of war, but sort of the humor and the intellectual side of it and the people, that's all part of the story as well.
Right. I'm dying for someone to write a book. Jonathan Trigg, who I interviewed a couple months ago, wrote a brilliant book about the East Tyrone, the East Tyrone IRA. If someone could come along and basically do a book on them and Fermanagh and South Armagh and just kind of go through some of the compare and contrast of the various rural brigades versus each other and versus the urban ones. That would make for a fantastic book if someone out there wants to write it. Again, as the author, I don't know if you have anything to do with it, but I don't believe there's an audio version of Bandit Country. I
uh
I,
yeah, I
I
don't
looked
know.
on Audible. I don't think there is. There should be. It would make more accessible to.
Yeah, so I don't know. So I've been asked that. No, there isn't, and that's kind of annoying. Um, and it's not part of the deal with Bite Back. But if anybody wants to do it, then I'd be delighted, and I'd be for reading it. I don't know whether how the English accent works or whatever, and they're professional people uh, to do these things. But yeah, I think it'd be great to have it on audio because obviously that's what I mean. I do it myself as well now. That's a lot of the way, the way a lot of people consume books, which is great.
Same. I mean, you can't beat actually just sitting down and focusing on a book, but we live busy lives, and you can't always just sit down and solely focus on the book. So yeah, audio would be great. What was I going to ask you? Oh yeah, was there anything else you wanted to drop in or mention, or just kind of leave the listeners with?
No, I don't think so. I mean, just, I'm always um, open for uh, communication and stuff. So if it's anybody that live this wants to contact me, you can my website's just like tobyharnden.com. You can contact me via that, and I'm on all the usual kind of social media type things. So I'm always, you know, interested to hear from people, and it's still a subject uh, that's really close to my heart. I'm proud of the book. I feel like it is a, sort of an important contribution, and but I also know that it's hard for people if they've had friends killed or they've been grievously wounded or it's just affected their life. So I do take it very, very seriously as well.
Yeah, actually, on that note, I meant to say it earlier, but yeah, if anyone from that time, be it military or IRA or anyone who just lived there, I love getting emails from people just kind of t telling their own kind of like little personal stories about the time this happened or that happened. If anyone who was involved, even if they don't want to even if they don't want to like reveal their identity, I'd have no problem doing an interview with like an ex-IRA man who was there anonymously, as long as I could kind of confirm who it was. Even if like obviously most of my interviews I go through like a biography. I kind of go through their life. If anyone didn't want to do that, that's completely fine. If they just want to speak about a particular operation or a particular aspect or just anything, it wouldn't have to be like most of my interviews. Just for anyone listening, if they did want to get in contact, I know um people from that area are kind of notoriously not trusting of outsiders and tight-lipped. And I think pe people have kind of joked in comments and stuff before that, oh, you'll never speak to some of them because they can't verify the last three generations of your fucking family. Yeah, if anyone does, my door is always open, my email's there, and we can chat and arrange. Mate, for writing the book, absolute classic. We went through plenty of attacks and bits from the book and stuff. No substitute for reading the book. The book does so much more detail. Very, very information dense, but not. But it doesn't feel that way. It's very,
Yeah.
very readable. And you'll learn a lot. So yeah, absolute classic. Make sure you read the book. And thank you for joining me, mate.
All right. Well, thanks so much, John. I really appreciate it. And thank you for reading. You clearly read it and digested it, and I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.